so many pounds over the years. Our dinner. Eat up my boy, laughed Mace. As happy as Garland was to be with his father, he felt somewhat out of place during the whole meal. For years, Randall Tarley kept him humble with countless tasks and assignments as a squire. Garland felt at ease during the most menial of tasks, and now being back in luxury felt foreign to him. He wanted to excuse himself and head to Tarlis camp to do what the Lord of Hornhill requires. But he was eating with his father for the first time in years, and that made him happy at least. Underscore 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 underscore. Paxter Redwine kept shouting order after order, but with all the chaos, he seemed to be losing control of the situation. You boy. Ride back to Redwine Castle and bring every man here now, he shouted at a page and then turned to the crew of the Red Flower. Get as many men ashore as possible. We need to take this fight on solid ground where we have the advantage. Any ship that is trapped is to hold their ground but not openly engage. Have every ship under attack be evacuated. Paxter ordered. Nearby a massive ship with a Kraken sigil on its sails was slaughtering the crew of an arbor ship. A large man with a Kraken-shaped helm was leading the attack, and Paxter had no doubt it was a Greyjoy. But for the moment, Paxter couldn't worry about that. Most of the Redwine fleet was trapped. Large wrecks of the battle had blocked off many ships from joining the fight. The Ironborn seemed to be ignoring them and going straight for the large important ships. Probably hoping to kill highborn lords or take hostages. My lord. We need to get you out of here now, pleaded Merrill Florent, Paxter's personal squire. The boy was green as grass and not exactly talented with a sword, but he always did what he was told without question. I am not running. My family has held off Ironborn on our home for over 1,000 years, and I will not be the first Redwine who ran, shouted Paxter. He might lose most of his fleet, but he would be damned to the seven hells before he loses his home to these fucking Ironborn savages. If the Greyjoys were foolish enough to continue the fight on too dry land, Paxter would make them regret it. After a little more shouting, the men caught their breath and rushed off to their various tasks. Paxter led his personal men-at-arms onto the docks. Many had received the order and were coming ashore with the Ironborn right on their heels. Men were abandoning some ships entirely and either escaped via lifeboats or just simply swam for their lives. Paxter cut down several Ironborn that tried to intercept him as he made his way towards a ship under attack. Being docked already with a plank out allowed his men to rush on board to help. Having chainmail and the best swords gold can buy proved to be a huge advantage compared to the Ironborn who wore leather armor and simple axes or pikes for weapons. Paxter took off the hand of an attacker who was about to kill a helpless boy cowering behind a series of supply crates. The man's shrieks of pain were silenced when Paxter took off his head. He was about to join the rest of his men in finishing off the raiders when he caught a glimpse of the boy's face, and Paxter couldn't believe it. There cowering before him was his own son Horace Redwine. Horace. What you doing here? Screamed Paxter as he pulled the boy to his feet. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Horace cried. Is Hobber here as well? Snapped Paxter as he took his son by the arm and quickly led him to the plank. Where Horace was, usually his twin brother Hobber was right with him. No, just me. I just wanted to see the ships before they sail off. Hobber didn't want to come, whimpered Horace. Thank the seven Hobber wasn't here as well. Varric, Bryce. Paxter shouted, summoning two of his personal guards. With the fighting on the ship all but finished, the two quickly scrambled to their lord's side. Take my son back to the castle immediately. Keep a low profile and don't draw attention to yourselves, he commanded. The two knights nodded and led the boy away. Paxter fought the urge to go with them, but he needed to stay and lead his men. And by the gods, he was going to lead them to victory or die trying. Underscore 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 underscore. It was just another dinner with nobility. Ned Stark kept telling himself that as he finished dressing himself in a black and gold tunic. He had gone through hundreds of these with countless high-born families over the years. But none of those were the Lannisters. The richest family in Westeros was also the one family that truly got under Ned's skin. Just the fact that someone as ruthless as Tywin was ruling them was bad enough, but the fact that Jaime the Kingslayer was his heir only made it worse. No matter how noble the reasons Jaime had when he killed Aerys Targaryen, Ned could never find it in himself to ever trust the man. What if one day he decides that fighting the Starks was a noble cause? Your Grace. Sir Brynden here to see you, called out Barristan from outside in the hallway. He was standing guard with Mandon Moore. Send him in, replied Ned. Brynden entered the room with an annoyed look on his face. Your Grace, my brother has arrived with nearly 20,000 men. Lord Tywin is tending to their needs at the moment, but unfortunately it won't cause him to be late for dinner, and Lord Hoster will be joining us as well, he reported. Blackfish didn't hide his disdain for the Lannisters any more than Ned, but he also didn't hide his anger towards Hoster either. What really happened to make them so bitter towards one another Ned couldn't guess, but he never asked. It was none of his business. At least I won't be eating with the Lannisters alone, muttered Ned. Hoster and Tywin together again. The last time they spoke, they were going to marry Jaime and Lysa. Thank the seven, Jaime joining the Kingsguard put an end to that, but now that they are back together, who knows what they'll conspire. It's never good to have two ambitious men in the same room, stated Brynden. You make it sound like Hoster will betray me, said Ned. Don't get me wrong. My brother would never do that, but he's started a trend. He managed to turn the Tullys into one of the most influential families in Westeros with his political maneuverings. Marrying Catelyn to you, nearly marrying Lysa to Jaime, and when that failed she married Jon Arryn. Ed Muir still isn't married, and it's possible Tywin could offer him Cersei. I've also heard that he's in talks with Mace Tyrell to marrying Jaime and Marjorie. Though he doesn't admit it publicly, Mace seems to enjoy courting the idea of his eldest son Willers marrying Doran's eldest daughter Arianne. My brother started this whole mess by trying to get as many advantageous marriages he possibly could. Now everyone's doing the same, spoke Brynden. One would normally glad to hear of such political maneuverings. Such interweaving alliances in theory would strengthen peace in the Seven Kingdoms, but that was only in theory. In reality, it was still every family out for itself, trying to outdo the others. It also could turn the country into a powder keg. If one family declares war on another, then all of their allies would join in the slaughter. What truly kept the kingdoms together was a king. A responsibility Ned had managed to bear for the past 7 years, but it was not something he would wish on anyone. At times he could wish his family had stayed in Winterfell and stayed out of all of this. But it was too late for such hopes. My lord. Lady Cersei Lannister to see you, announced Sir Mandon. So Tywin sends his daughter to escort the king. It made sense though. Ned could barely stand being in the same room as Jaime, and it was no secret that Tywin hated his youngest child Tyrion and would never give him the honor of escorting a king. Send her in, commanded Ned. The beautiful daughter of Tywin Lannister entered the room dressed in crimson silk. Some men would have to spend half their lives to earn enough money to afford such lavish clothing. Your Grace, Cersei curtsied. If it pleases you, my father has sent me to escort you to the dining hall. Very well, my lady, Ned nodded. He followed the Lannister at her side while Brynden, Barristan, and Mandon followed close behind. Since Cersei wasn't surrounded at the moment by her father and siblings, Ned decided it was good time to probe a little for information. I must say I am surprised you are still unmarried, my lady. Cersei seemed amused by the statement. And why is that, your grace? Because I am the daughter of the wealthiest man in the world, or because many consider me to be the most beautiful woman in the world? Both, admitted Ned. There was no denying she was beautiful, but Ned was certain Cersei used that as an advantage to catch others off guard. She was a Lannister after all. I have had many suitors who have sought my hand, but if my father didn't send them away, then I would do it myself. None of them were worthy of me, stated Cersei. And just who exactly would you consider to be worthy of you? Asked Ned. Cersei had a smirk on her face when she answered, a king. Ned had heard the stories of how Tywin had always groomed her to be Rhaegar's queen, and that might have happened had Aerys Targaryen hadn't lost his mind. Jealous as he was of Tywin, any sane man would have understood the advantage of a marriage alliance with the Lannisters. Perhaps if he had accepted the match, Robert's rebellion could have ended differently. Ned had considered this over the years and knew despite his dislike of the family, they were too valuable to have as allies. As much as he hated to admit it, he might need to ensure the Lannisters' loyalty through other means than just giving them a seat on the small council. They entered a large dining room that no doubt had been prepared for Ned's arrival. He doubted the Lannisters ate together as a family unless it was on special occasions. Tyrion was already seated and already drinking wine. Cersei's smirk from a moment ago disappeared at the sight of her younger brother. "Your Grace, it is a privilege to have you as our guest under our roof. I hope my sister hasn't completely ruined your stay here," greeted Tyrion. "It's best to just try and ignore that drunken lecherous stump, Your Grace." "Father always does," Cersei glared as she took her seat. "I didn't come for hospitality. I came to fight a war," replied Ned. "Of course," shrugged Tyrion. He turned his attention to Ned's entourage, specifically Barristan and Brynden. "Are the infamous Kingsguard. Granted, you aren't exactly at your peak anymore, but impressive nonetheless." Ned kept his mouth shut and decided to let his Kingsguard fight their own battle. "I'm surprised that you can recognize us at all with how much you drink," dwarf countered Brynden. "Drinking is what I do best," Tyrion smiled as held up his cup before taking another sip. "Don't get me wrong. The Kingsguard is filled with some of the best knights in the Seven Kingdoms, but during Aerys' reign you had the greatest knights who ever lived. Arthur Dane, Gerald Hightower, Oswell Went, Lewin Martell, Jonnet Hordiary, and the greatest knight who ever lived, my brother Jaime Lannister," he spoke proudly. "That did not go over well with the Kingsguard." "Your brother profaned his honor by killing the man he swore to defend," snapped Barristan. Tyrion smirked as if he had been waiting for that answer. "Tell me, Sir Barristan, if Aerys had commanded you to aid him in setting King's Landing ablaze and killing hundreds of thousands of people, would you do it?" "No," Barristan immediately responded. "And if he dismissed you and got someone else to assist him instead, would you stop them by any means?" continued Tyrion. Ned could see where this was going, and so could Brynden and Barristan. "How about I answer you, dwarf?" answered Brynden. "Had I been there, then yes, I would have stopped Aerys. Probably wouldn't have killed him, but I would have knocked him out flat if he tried to give the order to anyone else. And you sit there in judgment of him, blackfish or goldfish, whatever you call yourself these days. All of you would be willing to sacrifice their lives, but Jaime is the only Kingsguard I know of who was willing to sacrifice his honor. My brother saved nearly 250,000 people that day, and for that I call him the greatest knight who ever lived." Tyrion spoke before taking a victorious sip from his cup. For the first time since she entered the room, Cersei seemed to have a proud look on her face. No one seemed to have a good rebuttal after that. No matter the words, Tyrion always had a better comeback, and no insult ever seemed to faze him. By the time Tywin and Jaime arrived, the youngest Lannister was seemingly victorious in the war of words. Hoster soon joined them, and the dinner seemed to be less eventful than expected. The conversations weren't hostile, and while casual, they weren't friendly either. Tywin didn't pay Hoster any mind, and vice versa. At least the rumor of a Cersei-Edmure match seemed less and less likely. "If I may inquire, Your Grace, what you intend to do with Balon Greyjoy once this war is over?" asked Tywin. All eyes glanced over to Ned for a response. "That question's a bit premature considering we're still fighting," replied Ned. "The Greyjoys' days are numbered. Once Mace Tyrell's host arrives, you will have an army 10 times whatever the Iron Islands can muster. Stannis Baratheon and Paxter Redwyne will crush the Iron Fleet, and then it will be a simple matter of subduing each individual island. So the only real question that matters is what you intend to do with Balon once this is all finished," explained Tywin. Justice was all Ned would say on the matter. A page quickly strolled into the room. "Your Grace, my lords. Maester Crelan has received a raven from the Arbor. Underscore 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 underscore. Victorian almost screamed when he lost sight of Paxter. The Iron Victory crew managed to take the enemy ship they were lodged in and free themselves, but now the Lord of the Arbor had vanished. That man was the whole point of the attack. If they couldn't take him hostage, this whole raid would have been for nothing. While the Arbor fleet was sustaining far more casualties, the Iron Fleet had less to lose. They needed as many men as possible if they were going to defeat Stannis Baratheon and the royal fleet. That was why they attacked ships that could box in others from joining in the fight, and Victorian could attack Paxter directly. But the damned lord disappeared during the fighting, and with all the chaos, he could be anywhere. Onto the docks and plunder what you can. Take anyone who looks highborn prisoner, but kill anyone else that gets in your way, commanded Victorian. His men quickly scrambled to pass on the orders and to join in on the fight. Maybe someone will get lucky and find him. And if not, then perhaps they will take a few highborn hostages and make a decent ransom out of them. The enemy had started to rally together on shore and were preparing for a counter-attack, probably once reinforcements from Castle Redwyne. "Captain," called out Ragnar Pike, who was dragging a boy of maybe 10. He shoved the boy down right in front of Victorian. "Care to explain yourself?" "I'm not into little boys," Ragnar, Victorian said. A couple of the men found 2 knights escorting this boy through the docks. "Judging from his clothing, I'd say he's highborn," explained Ragnar. Victorian grabbed the boy by the chin. "You got a name, boy?" he demanded to know. "Horrors of House Redwyne, my lord," whimpered the child. The fact that the boy looked like he was going to piss himself meant he was probably telling the truth. Victorian smiled. "The drowned god truly rewards the faithful. Take the boy back to the Iron Victory and order the men to withdraw back to their ships." "We're leaving," he ordered. That did not go over well with Ragnar. "Captain, we're winning and the men barely had any time to plunder." "They won't be happy about this," he protested. "Then they can express their disapproval to my face, but they will obey me," replied Victorian. Underscore 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 underscore. Prince Roderick Greyjoy had awaited this moment his whole life. Standing on his flagship the Red Kraken as the attack fleet approached Seaguard, Roderick's moment of glory was finally at hand. He was his father's heir and future king of the Iron Islands, but for years had only led basic raids and plunders on wealthy merchant ships. When father declared himself king, Uncle Victorian was the one who led the attack on Lannisport and destroyed the Lannister fleet. Then Victorian raided stronghold after stronghold, his name spoken with increasing reverence amongst the Ironborn with each passing day. And yet the future king was barely spoken of at all. Sir Roderick would bloody anyone who disrespected to his face, but he had no accomplishments to his name. The Ironborn followed strength, and if Roderick didn't have accomplishments to his name, they will never declare him their king. But that will change when he is done sacking Seaguard. The stronghold was surrounded by a town and had been originally built as a watchtower to monitor for Ironborn raiders. For centuries, it endured against any attack from land or sea under the rule of House Mallister. And when Roderick raised the Kraken banner on its walls, it would be used as a staging point for raids into the Riverlands. Then the Ironborn would speak of their prince and future king with the same awe as his uncle. Beside him Harros Harlaw, heir to House Harlaw and wielder of the Valyrian sword Nightfall, stood beside the prince. The two grew up together on Pike and had been close friends. When Roderick needed a first mate for the raid, Harros was the only person he even considered standing at his side. "Do you hear that?" Harros asked. Seaguard's blooming tower was ringing with its massive bronze bell, signaling the townspeople to seek the safety of the castle during an Ironborn raiders. "That's the first time they've ranged the blooming tower in over 300 years," commented Roderick. After Aegon's conquest, the Ironborn's old way had been suppressed and only a few ever dare defy the Targaryens. Now the dragons were gone and the old way could return to the Iron Isles. "And once I've taken the city, it'll be the last time it rings." Underscore 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 underscore. By the time the royal fleet had arrived, the harbor was in ruins. Dozens of wrecks blocking ships from being moved, and repairs were slow if any. The Ironborn did their fair share of damage, but when Davos had finished inspecting, he felt confident that more than half the Redwyne fleet was seaworthy. He had hoped to give the good news to Lord Stannis the moment he arrived on horseback to Redwyne Castle. But the sounds of shouting in the halls made him realize that something was amiss. he entered the great hall to find Stannis and Paxter Redwyne arguing with both of their men almost ready to kill each other. Stannis had little love for Lord Redwyne after the siege of Storm's End, but he said he was willing to put aside his disdain and do his duty. "My lords," called out Davos, hoping to interject before things got worse. All eyes in the room turned towards him. Sir Davos greeted Stannis with a simple grunt. Davos learned long ago that was how Stannis greeted almost anyone. "Onion Knight. Perhaps you can talk sense to your master," said Paxter. "Had I not partaken in the guest rite, I would have you executed for treason," Stannis threatened Paxter. "And were you not a guest under my roof, your head would be on a spike on my battlements," snapped Paxter. "My lords, please. Perhaps we should disperse for now and let cooler heads prevail," offered Davos. Wordlessly, Paxter exited the hall along with several guards. "We're heading back to my ship. I will not sleep in the same castle as traitors," commanded Stannis. Davos followed the man out to the courtyard. "If may ask, my lord, what exactly was that all about?" he asked. "Paxter is traitor, that's what. The man refuses to sail against the Iron Fleet as his son Horus is their hostage," answered Stannis as he saddled his horse. Davos was starting to understand what was going on. Paxter won't sail while his son's life is at stake, and Stannis would never tolerate disobedience to the crown. To the Lord of Storm's End, not following a royal command no matter the reasons was treason. "I mean no disrespect, my lord, but surely you must understand his refusal. You cannot compel him to commit an action that would condemn his own child," Davos tried to explain. "What about the men who died at Lannisport? They were sons and fathers, and yet do their lives mean less than Paxter's boy? Does justice stop just because one life is at stake? If we don't stop the Ironborn, more sons and fathers will die, and I will not allow a child, no matter how innocent he is, to stop that," said Stannis as he mounted his horse. "There's no need to threaten Lord Redwyne, my lord. I believe this is another way to resolve this peacefully," said Davos. "And just what kind of solution do you propose?" asked Stannis. "I can rescue the boy," answered Davos. The battle was going to be one for the ages. Sure to its reputation, the townspeople of Seaguard fought the invaders with a ferocity Roderick hadn't seen outside of the Iron Islands. Hundreds of years ago these lands belonged to the Iron Crown, so maybe the people of Seaguard had a little Ironborn blood inside of them, which would explain the fight inside of them. For nearly an hour, Roderick and Harris had cut their way through the city along with their personal men-at-arms. They fought all the way towards the walls of the castle. Roderick intended to scale the walls and take the booming tower which had been ringing throughout the entire battle. Once it was taken, the bells would go silent and all of Seaguard would realize their defeat. It was more a blow to morale than an actual victory, but it was an important blow nonetheless. When they reached the walls, Roderick's men readied grappling hooks and flung them up. It took them several tries until eventually all the ropes went slack. Roderick went up first with Harris and his Valyrian sword right behind him. The prince held a shield above him as he scaled the walls. It wasn't easy, but the Ironborn drilled their children on how to sail, fight, and sack a city from the moment you could hold a stick. Rocks and arrows hailed down around him. Someone tried to shoot him with a bow from a nearby arrow slit, but Roderick managed to hold onto the rope one-handed and use his free hand to toss a dagger through it and into the attacker's head. The attack slowed him down and several of his men began to advance past him. Once the men reached the top, the rocks and arrows were replaced with crimson drops. Roderick pulled himself onto the top of the wall where his men and Harris were already carving their way towards the massive bell drum. It was so large that it took a metal bar the size of a battering ram to ring it. "Kill them. Kill them all and shut that fucking thing up," the prince laughed. The Ironborn pressed the assault, but the guards stood their ground. Not a single one retreated as Roderick and Harris cut through them, working together. Harris took off an arm, then Roderick a split second later would finish it with a blow to the forehead. Harris slashed another man from neck to rib and kicked another towards Roderick, who wrapped his axe around the man's neck, using it as leverage to snap it. By the time they were done, bodies of both Ironborn and Riverlanders littered the area. Though costly, Roderick had taken the bell tower, and for the first time in an hour the bell went silent. In the city below, Ironborn clashed with the city watch and knights, all the while taking whatever plunder and salt wifes they wished. This was Roderick's victory, his conquest. His name would be remembered forever as the first Ironborn to sack and conquer Seaguard. A horn took him out of his moment. At first he thought it was a signal by the Riverlanders to retreat. When the horn blew again, he realized it was one of their horns. Iron Islanders craft them from material that gave off a distinctive sound. One blast meant they were charging, two blasts meant enemy reinforcements. That was impossible. The closest stronghold that could actually provide reinforcements of significance was the twins, and House Free would never jeopardize their own lives to protect anyone else. Sire looked down there. Harris pointed down into the city. At one of the city gates, hundreds of cavalry charged into the city. They ran down the Ironborn in the city streets, breaking their lines and turning the tides. Banners of the North waved in the air among their ranks. The stark direwolf, the flayed man of Bolton, the umber giant, and the sunburst of Carstark. This wasn't possible. The Northerners were scattered along the coastline. There's no way they could have mustered this large a force and arrive so quickly. Unless somehow they knew of Roderick's mission. Father only told him and Harris their destination back at Pike. The rest of the Ironborn weren't even told where they were going until they were halfway there. "My prince, we must retreat. Our men are losing ground by the second," shouted Harris. "No. Tell the men to stand their ground," ordered Roderick. "But sire, there's too many of them," protested Harris. Roderick grabbed him by the armor and got into his face. "I said stand your ground. Underscore 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 underscore. Lord Benjen Stark never thought he would be grateful to a eunuch. When Lord Varys sent word of a possible attack on Seaguard, Benjen gathered what cavalry he could and rode in all haste to assist the city. And now that he was cutting his way through the city gates, it would seem once again the spider was right. From the number of longships anchored offshore, this wasn't the Iron Fleet but rather a token force large enough to take the city. Great Jon Umber led the cavalry charge with Rickard Carstark and his men close behind. Benjen figured since they wanted to fight so badly, they could go in first. Not that he was going to sit back and let his bannermen do all the fighting. He planned on fighting alongside them until Seaguard was secured. Benjen had never killed a man before in his life. He had been trained for it since the moment he could first hold a stick, but still the moment he rode by an axe-wielding raider, it felt almost unworldly as his sword swung in his hand and took off the man's jaw. Whatever horror he felt at the sight of blood and the shriek of death was gone as he approached another Ironborn. He remembered his older brother Brandon once telling him that when you are in battle, you feel a sense of rush that can overwhelm you. Your body numbs yourself to pain and emotion to the point where you care only for victory and survival. Now he knew his brother was right. Whatever abhorrence Benjen felt towards violence was gone, replaced by the urge to cut down his enemies and win this battle for his brother the king and all of family. The Ironborn crumbled at their charge, and the cries of "what is dead may never die" quickly changed to retreat. Umber and Carstark pressed on with the attack while Benjen held back. Let the men have their glory. He needed to check on the Mallisters and see if they were all right. He led his honor guard towards the castle at the center of the city, and the fighting began to intensify. The Ironborn were less numerous but were fighting back more fiercely than before, and even to the death. As Benjen and his men fought their way through, it became clear that the enemy was trying to block reinforcements from entering the castle. Which could only mean that the Ironborn were already inside and fighting their way through. Benjen lost half his men before the Northerners were finally able to break into the castle. The fighting inside was just as brutal. Knights and raiders clashed in the hallways, leaving bodies all along the hallways. A nearby Mallister knight was knocked to the ground with a raider standing over him with an axe. Benjen rescued him by stabbing his blade through the Ironborn's spine and out through his stomach. Kicking the soon-to-be corpse away, Benjen helped the knight to his feet. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes, my lord," the knight nodded. "Where is Lord Mallister?" "Is he safe?" inquired Benjen. He rallied what men he could spare and headed towards the top of the castle to retake the booming tower. Underscore 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 underscore. "My prince, we need to leave now." Harris shouted at Roderick even as the two cleaved through another wave of attackers. Roderick swore he was half ready to skewer his friend if he didn't stop saying that. He was not going to go back to Pike as the prince who lost Seaguard. He would be remembered as a coward and unworthy of the Iron Crown. I won't have a coward fighting beside me. Roderick snapped at his friend. He had lost more the majority of his men, and yet it was clear the men and knights of Seaguard suffered far worse casualties. If the prince was going to die, he was going to take 100 Riverlanders for every one of his men. His name would be uttered in hush whispers as Khordhor, the Iron King whose kingdom expanded from Bear Island all the way to the Arbor. And so far, none of the defenders had proven to be worthy of killing Roderick. Then a new wave of attackers arrived, led by a man carrying a large two-handed sword and decked in heavy armor with a large golden eagle on his breastplate and golden wings on his helmet. It didn't take Roderick long to realize who he was. Lord Jason Mallister. Now this was going to be a worthy fight. For Seaguard. Mallister shouted to his men. They responded with their own battle cry and charged. These knights must have been Lord Mallister's personal guards because they fought as fiercely and brutally as Ironborn. Roderick kicked one attacker's shield, knocking the man into another. He then ducked underneath a sword swipe and twisted around to the back of his new attacker. Wrapping his forearm around the man's neck with one hand, Roderick placed his other hand on the man's temple and twisted. The sick snap confirmed the kill. He shoved the corpse into another attacker, knocking him down, and then drove his axe through the helmet of another. Before long, Jason Mallister stood alone. Roderick meanwhile still had 5 men alongside him. The Ironborn surrounded Mallister, preventing any possible escape, but the man held his ground. In the excitement of battle, Roderick lost track of Harris and didn't see him among the survivors nor the corpses on the ground. Harris, screamed Roderick, realizing the coward had abandoned him. Mallister laughed, and here I thought all Ironborn were stupid. Lifting his axe, Roderick prepared to take all the anger he felt on Lord Mallister. Then a new wave of attackers rushed in, dressed in armor with fur coats. The signature of the first men of the North. "Protect Lord Mallister," ordered their leader. They charged and Roderick's men responded in kind. Ignoring the others, the prince charged at Mallister. If he was going to die, he would take the old man with him. To his credit, Jason fought like a legend. Every blow was precise and powerful. His blocks and parries incredibly fast for someone with such a large weapon and heavy armor. But it was because of that heavy armor that gave Roderick one distinct advantage. Faking a strike to the head, the prince suddenly dropped his weapon and tackled Jason to the ground. His heavy armor worked against him as he tried to fight back, but Roderick forced the man's helmet off. He picked up his nearby axe and raised it to split Lord Mallister's head in two. A sudden blow to Roderick's back took the breath of his body. Gasping, he glanced down at his chest to see a bloody sword sticking through it. The sword was pulled back through and Roderick stumbled forward to the battlements. His chest felt like it was on fire and his strength faded as he turned to see his attacker. A man with long dark hair wearing a dire wolf on his breastplate. Lord Benjen Stark himself had done the deed. Roderick smiled as he coughed up blood through his teeth. The only regrets he had were that he didn't kill Harris before he ran and that he didn't kill more. His strength spent, he collapsed over the battlements and fell off the side towards the town below. His last thoughts were of the songs the Ironborn would sing in his honor in the halls of the drowned god. Underscore 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 underscore. Nymeria ducked underneath another swing as Rob forced her back. Yet another night in the cellars where the children gathered to test their skills against each other, but this time was different and everyone knew it. Rob was usually a more passive fighter, biding his time until he could gain the upper hand. But the instant his match between them began, something in him snapped and Nymeria was caught off guard by her opponent's relentless assault. Rob swore he could no longer hear the others cheering as he kicked the sand snake into a wall and then delivered a blow to her chest. Nymeria dropped to her knees, battered and beaten. Everyone wasn't stunned by Rob's victory, but rather how he seemed to just completely lash out at her ruthlessly and even savagely. He tossed his wooden sword into the wall and just stormed off. It was a side of the prince few people ever saw. Rob had always been generally happy with his family, friends, and his life at the royal court. But ever since that beggar Hubert was sentenced for murder, something changed inside of him. At first it was grief for causing another man's death. Nothing could be more tragic or wrong than that. Soon after father left to fight in the war, and for the first time in a long time, Rob didn't have him to provide counsel. He could have gone to someone else like mother, but father was the only one who understood. As the future king, Rob had the power of life and death of millions of people in his hands, and his first showing of it got someone killed. Then that grief became anger. Anger at Hubert for being a murderer and causing of all of this, anger at father for not being here, anger at the Greyjoys for starting the whole war that took father from him, and just now anger at Nymeria. She never thought he was good enough to fight him, but he just proved her wrong. And yet that didn't bring him any satisfaction, especially upon seeing the reaction of his friends and cousins. They were horrified by what he did, and what did Nymeria do to deserve it? Nothing, of course. She was just unfortunate enough to be on the receiving end of all Rob's anger. Underscore 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 underscore. The mood was somber when the Tyrell host arrived at Casterly Rock. The attack on Seaguard was crushed by the sudden arrival of northern reinforcements. What should have been a quick and decisive victory following it had been stalled due to the loss of the Red Wine fleet. Stannis was preparing the royal fleet for attack, but was in no hurry to engage the Iron Fleet until he was certain that victory was assured. Victorian Greyjoy had led the Iron Fleet to anchor off Fair Isle, waiting for Ned Stark and his forces to make the next move. All eyes were on the king, and if he wasn't able to crush this rebellion, some of the great lords of Westeros might decide a new king is needed. The joint armies gathered around Casterly Rock were growing anxious and even bored. Many were hoping to either get some action or finish the fighting quickly to get back to their families, and neither has come to pass. For the moment, Garland practiced his daily routines in Casterly Rock's courtyard. He would fight two men at the same time with a tony sword. The two individuals were different every day, but the outcome was always the same. It would end with Garland knocking them both out, and that wasn't what he wanted. He needed to challenge himself, force himself to fight someone who was better than him, or at least two people who could put up a decent fight. Lord Tarly was always off in meetings with father and King Stark, which took him out of consideration. Garland already fought and beaten the likes of Adam Marbrand, Davon Lannister, Robert Brax, and countless other knights and highborn. After so many victories, people were becoming less inclined to spar with him. Mostly because they didn't want to be embarrassed that a squire might beat them. For now, Garland had to settle for two knights from House Hunt, a knightly house that swore fealty to House Tully. But the two proved to be even less of a challenge than his previous opponents. After leaving them all moaning on the ground, Garland headed to the armory to put away his equipment. "Training against 2A," said a voice. Garland glanced up to see Jaime Lannister leaning against a wall near the armory entrance. He wondered how long the Kingslayer had been standing there watching him. "In battle you don't fight one-on-one. You're usually fighting several people at once," explained Garland. "I fought that out the hard way during the first battle with the Kingswood Brotherhood. Nearly had my head chopped off more than once," replied Jaime. Garland remembered studying that battle and the rest of the rebellion. He idolized Barristan Selmy and Arthur Dayne, and that was one of the few times the two had fought together on a battlefield. "I heard you fought the Smiling Knight during that battle." Jaime nodded. The man was a complete lunatic, but he was one of the best swordsmen I ever saw. "I managed to hold my own against him, but it was Arthur Dayne who finally slew him." "Care to show me how?" challenged Garland. "He's wanted a worthy opponent for a long time, and the Kingslayer was said to be one of the greatest fighters alive." Jaime smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." Before long, Garland was back in the training courtyard in his padded armor and a blunted sword. Jaime stood opposite of him, swinging his own weapon stylishly to warm up. A crowd had started to gather around, including various lords and knights, including Tyrion Lannister. Garland remembered him when he dined with his father with the Lannisters the night prior. No one needed to explain the rules. The two of them already knew what they would be. Beat your opponent until he submitted. 10 golden dragons on Garland bet Sahil Hunt. A knight in Lord Tarly's service and someone Garland had beaten more than once. "I'll take that bet," responded Tyrion. Jaime attacked first, with a feigned low swipe, then a sudden thrust towards the head. Every move he made was swift and sudden, aimed at catching Garland off guard. To his credit, the former King's Guard was almost succeeding. Garland found fighting two ordinary knights at once was easier than fighting Jaime Lannister. He certainly earned his reputation. But though on the defensive, Garland was the one holding back. As he parried and avoided each blow, he observed how the Kingslayer seemed to repeat the same pattern. Attack high, low, then chest. Though the sequences were fast, a trained eye could see a pattern through the chaos. Jaime went for another high attack and Garland responded with a swing at the legs. It was at that moment that Garland realized his mistake. Jaime spun around his opponent's side and tried to strike him in the back. Garland barely got his blade around in time to block it. Jaime had done the pattern intentionally to lure him into a trap. Had Garland not practiced for such attacks for his 2-on-1 fights, he doubted he could have blocked it. Jaime was so fast and accurate that Garland found himself constantly on the defensive. The two locked their blades and Garland delivered a knee to the chest. The blow barely staggered Jaime, but it did give Garland the time to attempt a blow to the side. The momentum shifted as Garland was now on the offensive, delivering swings and jabs meant to unbalance his foe. Jaime continually deflected all of them but had no time to counter. Jaime started to smile as the minutes passed, enjoying himself. For the moment neither had dealt a decisive blow to the other and the crowd observing them had increased. Hundreds surrounded the courtyard, cheering the fighters on. It was no longer just bannermen and knights watching but powerful lords and ladies like Cersei Lannister, Brynden Tully, Barristan Selmy, and even Garland's father Mace Tyrell. Blow after blow, parry after parry, Garland still couldn't land a decisive move. The two locked again, only this time Jaime acted first. He swung one of his forearms, aiming for his opponent's head. Garland managed to block it but Jaime attacked with his other forearm, knocking a dazed Garland to the ground. By the time he regained his senses, Jaime had kicked away his sword. Lannister bannermen and lords cheered on at the sight of their liege's victory while reachmen and others groaned in defeat. Jaime said nothing as he held out his hand. Garland took it and was pulled onto his feet. "Not bad, kid. Not bad at all. Come to me anytime you want a rematch," smiled Jaime. The crowd dispersed as Jaime headed over to Tyrion and Cersei while Garland was approached by Mace, Barristan Selmy, and Brynden Tully. "By the seven, that was incredible, son. Another few years and it'll be you standing victorious over him. Lord Tarly has trained you well," Mace boasted. "That was impressive, Sir Garland," spoke Barristan. "Coming from the legend himself, that was high praise." "Thank you, sir, but I'm only a squire," said Garland. "Is there a reason Lord Tarly hasn't knighted you yet?" "You lasted longer than most knights twice your age would have against the Kingslayer," asked Brynden. "Lord Tarly says I need to experience a true battle of life and death before I deserve to call myself a knight," answered Garland. Mace frowned. "I'll have a word with him about that." "No, father. I want him to knight him when he is ready. I want to prove myself to him," protested Garland. "Something tells me you'll get your wish soon enough." "There's still a war to win," said Brynden. After dismissing himself, Garland headed to the armory to put away his equipment. He noticed someone following him as he stepped inside and began removing his armor. The stranger had white hair with a beard and coat, not dressed like a knight. But the most notable distinction about him was the missing fingers on his hand. "That was incredible. I could spend the rest of my life practicing and never coming close to your talent," the stranger remarked. "I'm sorry. I don't know you," replied Garland. "My name is Sir Davos Seaworth. You may know me as the Onion Knight," the man introduced himself. Now things were starting to make sense. The hero of Storm's End lost his fingers due to Lord Stannis's odd sense of justice. If that's how the man treats his friends, Garland didn't want to know how Stannis treated his enemies. "I've come to you because I have an important mission. Lord Redwyne's son is being held hostage and without his support, Lord Stannis may not be able to defeat the Iron Fleet. I have a plan to rescue the boy, but I need help. A small crew with incredible skills." "Then you've come to the wrong person. I'm only a squire," said Garland. "Who's more skilled with a blade than any so-called knight?" I have the king's authority to choose whomever I wish for this task, and I don't need knights, I need men who can kill. I know you haven't actually killed a man yet, but my instincts tell me you'll be able to endure, and I've learned to trust my instincts, said Davos. Even if I wanted to, my father wouldn't allow it. Nor would Lord Randall Tarley, as I'm still his squire, replied Garland. Why do you think I'm here in the first place? It was Lord Tarley who suggested you during my strategy meeting with the king, Davos spoke. That caught Garland off guard. He said a true knight must put aside the notion of leading men on a battlefield or siege, but rather do whatever was required of them in service to their lord and king. I'm asking you not just to rescue an innocent boy, but to win this war. Garland didn't even hesitate when he said, yes. Garland helped Davos load another barrel onto the boat. It was old and weathered, the kind of cargo boat you'd see passing through every port around the world. That was exactly what they needed for their mission. Garland's torn cloak and dusty trousers felt alien to him, as he had been dressed in the best clothing money could buy for most of his life. But common sailors didn't dress like that, and so he needed to dress accordingly, as well as the rest of the crew. Sir Davos had chosen his crew well. Sir Barristan Selmy, Sir Brynden Tully, and Sir Mandan Moore. 3 exceptional fighters of the King's Guard, and more had yet to join. Garland was told that one more had yet to arrive, and that wasn't someone to be trifled with. He didn't know what that meant until he arrived. The man was cloaked in rags, but he stood out like a cat among rats. He was massive and didn't bother concealing the burns covering half his face. That allowed Garland to instantly recognize him through his reputation. Sandor Clegane, the Hound they called him, although monster would have been more appropriate. Though Garland was somewhat surprised to see he had someone with him. From what he heard, the Hound generally lived alone and rarely was seen socializing with anyone aside from whores. Unlike Clegane, the companion had a hood concealing his face. "Are you the smuggler?" the Hound demanded. Davos and the other knights sized up their newest addition. "I was told there was only one of you coming," Davos said, eyeing the large man's companion. "He was until I decided to join," spoke a familiar voice. He removed his hood to reveal a handsome, clean-shaven face with golden hair. Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer himself, had joined them. "What is this?" demanded Barristan. "The Onion Knight told my father you needed the best killers he could find, and here we are. I would have also nominated the Mountain, but I couldn't guarantee the Hound and him wouldn't kill each other before we left port," explained Jaime. "And does your father know you're volunteering?" glared Blackfish. Jaime shrugged. "Does it matter? You need the best and we're here." "That's a no," muttered Blackfish. The Hound strolled onto the deck, brushing Garland aside. "Can we leave now? That fucking red wine brat isn't going to save himself," he grunted. Underscore 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 underscore. It was a magnificent sight to behold. Hundreds of longships all anchored offshore, waiting to the coming battle. Victorian Greyjoy stood on a balcony in Fair Castle, home to house farmen who had abandoned their holdings the moment the Iron Fleet had been spotted. A skeleton crew was left to main the gates, and they quickly surrendered. Fair Isle was no stranger to Ironborn raids, but they had always relied on the Kings of the Rock to protect them in the past. With the Lannister fleet a memory, no one could protect them. Victorian wasted no time in establishing Fair Castle as a base with only a minimal staff, as he needed most of his men ready at their ships should Stannis Baratheon and the royal fleet arrive. They had been sighted moving past the Shield Isles, and now a confrontation was all but inevitable. What's worse is that Lord Redwyne was sailing up the Sunset Sea as well, though the two fleets were no together, and it seemed that Paxter was following but not joining. Which meant Victorian needed to keep his hostage close at all times. Little Horus adjusted to his captivity well enough. He didn't complain or cry, though he probably knew that would have done him little good. He ate with Victorian and his closest companions every meal like any highborn hostage, slept in a bedroom most of Victorian's own men would kill to have, and was attended by servants who saw to his every need. Yet for all his comfort, if his father's fleet should ever engage any Ironborn ship, Victorian would end his life with a swing of his axe. At the moment, the boy was in the courtyard practicing with a bow and arrow. On a ship, they were more important than a sword, considering they could kill an enemy before he even boards your ship. One thing the Redwynes and Ironborn shared in common was their focus on training with the bow earlier in their lives than with a sword or axe. Unfortunately, Horus's aim was completely horrendous. He was only a child though, and Victorian couldn't help but admire his stubbornness as he would consistently pick up the arrows he missed and try again. The Ironborn in the courtyard one by one ceased their drills and watched the boy, laughing every time his arrow would land far from the target. Victorian stormed down to the courtyard. His appearance instantly spurred his men to get back to exercises. He approached the boy, who seemed to try and ignore him. Defiant to the last, a typical trait among the Redwynes as the Ironborn learned from centuries of conflict. "You're holding it too tight. Relax your bow arm and don't pull so hard on the string. You don't need a full draw to hit the target," explained Victorian. The boy glared at him out of the corner of his eye. He fired another arrow almost blatantly wrong. Victorian grabbed his own bow and arrow and hit the dead center of the target with a quick simple shot. Horus was a little surprised by how quickly his captor managed to shoot the arrow. "Your drawing hand should be the only part in your body that moves when you draw," Victorian continued to explain. Horus started to listen to his advice and slowly but surely got more accurate until he finally hit the target. Not exactly dead center and far from ready for a real battle, but he was learning. "Why are you showing me this?" asked Horus. "House Redwyne has always been a family of warriors and a warrior should know how to fight," answered Victorian. Underscore 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 underscore. The sun had set when they finally sprang into action. Tonight was finally the night that Garland would prove himself. Alongside him were among the greatest knights and fighters in all of Westeros, and he was counted among their ranks. Barristan Selmy, Jaime Lannister, Brynden Tully, Sandor Clegane, and Mandon Moore. Garland could barely contain himself as the team moved slowly towards the walls of Fair Castle. They didn't have much time. They had already killed 2 patrols of men with guard dogs, and they will eventually be missed. For the past several days the group had sailed along the Sunset Sea around Fair Isle disguised as common sailors. Traffic was light as the Iron Fleet had taken over Fair Castle and the nearby harbour to wait for the Royal Fleet to arrive. The Redwyne was right behind it but not joining it. Rather, it was Lord Paxter's way of keeping his promise should Davos and the others succeed. Lord Stannis made it quite clear that should this mission fail, he was going to launch an attack regardless, and they had little time left. They anchored a day's travel away from Fair Castle. Any closer and they were sure to run into Ironborn patrols. They walked on foot for the rest of the journey, avoiding any foot patrols whenever possible, though not always. Fair Castle was situated on top of a hill overlooking the nearby bay. Its walls were sturdy and strong, rebuilt and redesigned every time the Ironborn raided the island. But its problem was never strong walls, as House Farman never had the manpower to repel an Ironborn attack. If they had 1,000 or so more soldiers, they could repel any attack, but Fair Isle wasn't an ideal location to live. Due to its close proximity to the Iron Isles, the island had been raided countless times throughout history. The patrols were minimal as they reached the walls. Victorian Greyjoy must have been keeping most of his men near their ships in case Stannis attempted a surprise attack. Torchlights moved along the battlements but slowly, and no sign of urgency. It seemed their presences thus far had gone unnoticed, but that wasn't going to last much longer if everything went according to plan. And also if things didn't go according to plan. "Are you sure it's around here, boy?" Brynden asked Jaime. House Farman had a hidden entrance into the castle built into a nearby rock outcrop, a fact that Jaime Lannister managed to get from Lord Farman after he fled the Ironborn attack to Casterly Rock. Garland didn't need to be told that Jaime probably threatened the old man in some way to get the information. It wouldn't be the first time a Lannister had to do that to Lord Farman, though Lord Tywin's threat was infamous throughout the Seven Kingdoms. When House Farman had become unruly, Tywin didn't send a letter or messenger to resolve the problem. He just sent an envoy to play the reins of Castellaria. "Just give me a second, Goldfish," explained Jaime. Despite the insults, the Kingslayer seemed to harbor some respect towards Brynden. Garland could tell because the only time Jaime insulted the man was whenever Blackfish made an insult first. He did the same with all the others except Samandon, whom Jaime constantly referred to as Sir Stick Up His Ass. Finally he smiled and reached down, grabbing something. He lifted up a metal slab that had been well hidden, covered in dirt and pedals. Who wants to go down the dark creepy tunnel first? Underscore 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 underscore. Victorian lay in Lord Farman's bed, axe in hand, as his eyes refused to close. He knew he needed to get some sleep, but he just had this feeling a battle was coming. Maybe he was getting irritated from waiting for the enemy to come to him like the rest of his men. All of the Iron Fleet was itchy for a fight, even for one they might not win. The Ironborn were excellent killers and born seamen, but they were lacking when it came to a disciplined, coordinated army. They were strong, but they needed to be won, and Victorian wasn't certain they would be when Stannis attacked. A knock at his door disturbed his sleep. "What is it?" shouted Victorian, furious at being roused at such a late hour. "Captain. Urgent message from Farpoint," responded his guard. Farpoint was a small fishing village on the southern tip of the island and would be the first watch post that would warn of an incoming attack from the incoming royal fleet. Victorian got to his feet and opened the door to see Old Man Maester Baldwin holding a small parchment in his hands. Probably a message via Raven. To report this at such a late hour only proved it was important. "What is it?" demanded Victorian. "My lord. Farpoint reports a massive fleet has been spotted sailing under cover of darkness. They'll be here by morning," reported Baldwin. "Send word to all the captains. Prep their ships and crew immediately. I want every available man who can hold a weapon on a ship and ready to fight," ordered Victorian. Underscore 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 underscore. Sandor Clegane took point with a torch in one hand and sword in the other as the group moved through the darkened tunnel. Jaime followed behind him, then Garland, Brynden, Mandan, and Barristan, who was covering their flank. "What if Sir Davos launches the ship early?" Garland asked to Blackfish. Seven hells, that Tyrell was starting to really annoy Sandor. He was so green he practically pisses grass, but the flower boy was with them because apparently he knows how to swing a sword. "That's out of your hands, boy, so just concentrate on your own task," he replied. The Blackfish wasn't any better company than Flower Boy. Jaime chuckled, "Don't be tense. You'll get something to kill soon enough. You're not squeamish, are you? Because there's nothing worse in a fight to have some green boy who vomits the first time he decapitates someone. The damn Kingslayer was the most annoying of all. He just wouldn't stop talking and admiring his stupid jokes." The Hound turned around and with a firm voice he said, "I'm not going to let myself get killed from the first person who hears all of you prattling like a pair of cunts. So shut the fuck up. All of you." No one said a word after that. They came to a halt in front of a stone wall at the end of the tunnel. There were no signs of a door or exit of any kind. If it was obvious, then it wouldn't be a secret entrance. Jaime spoke up before anyone could say anything. He took the torch from Clegane and held it closer to the floor. Eventually he touched a specific brick about a foot above his head, then moved to the left, counting as he went. Jaime stopped his hand as the 12th brick and pushed. The wall shook and started to twist, revealing a darkened storage room. This was an extra root cellar the Farmans built just to conceal the passage entrance. "Doesn't really hold any food, so we shouldn't have any unexpected visitors in here, but the hallway outside leads to the real larder, so prepare yourselves," explained Jaime. "Sir Mandan. Stay here and cover our exit," Barristan ordered. The Silent Knight from the Vale nodded in acknowledgement. The Hound handed his torch to Barristan and slightly opened the only door in the room. The hallway was barely light, with a few torches hanging on the wall but no sign of anyone. Moving quickly but silently, he stepped outside and made his way to the end of the hallway. The group followed him as they passed by the larder. Sounds could be heard behind a closed door, but there was no sense in starting a fight they could avoid. This was a stealth mission after all. Sandor wasn't naive enough to think it's going to stay that way much longer. They headed up a set of stairs into the castle itself. underscore 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 underscore. Horus tried to sleep, but it eluded him. He had the most comfortable quarters of anyone in the castle, and yet that brought no real comfort to him. At any moment, an Ironborn could walk right into his chamber and sever his head. Victorian demanded he write letters to his father, but never showed him any letters his family replied with. Horus had brought shame to his family and ancestors, letting himself be used by the Ironborn. The Redwynes fought the Iron Isles for thousands of years, sometimes losing their lands but always reclaimed it by force. He ignored the clattering sound outside his room. The guards were constantly getting drunk on duty. A sudden scream, however, did startle Horus. Were the guards in some kind of drunken brawl? Horus got to his feet and slowly moved towards the door. More slumps and gasps followed as he got closer. Suddenly the door shot open as a massive man with a burnt face and a bloody long sword stepped inside. He might have been the most frightening man Horus had ever seen in his life. "Horus!" shouted a familiar voice. To his surprise, Horus's cousin Gullen rushed inside. His sword and armor was drenched in blood just like the burnt man, and it wasn't his blood. "It's all right, cousin. We're here to rescue you," Gullen explained. "Can you hurry it up in there, flower boy?" "The whole damn castle knows we're here," shouted someone out in the hallway who, judging from the sounds, was in a sword fight. Gullen quickly grabbed Horus by the shoulder and led him out of the room with the large burnt man right behind them. Horus watched as 3 knights battled at least a dozen Ironborn, and yet despite the numbers were winning. What seemed most impossible was how incredible the oldest knight was better than the rest of his companions. The man fought 5 at a time and yet held his own. Gullen and the burnt man quickly joined the fight and killed the rest of the attackers. "Is this him?" asked the old man. "Yes, now let's go," said Gullen. "Shame. I was just starting to have fun," chuckled a blonde-haired knight. Underscore 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 underscore. The sun was starting to rise in the distance as Victorian stood on the Iron Victory dressed in armor, axe and shield in hand. It was strange how relieved he was to finally have a battle. It might not be one he would win, but it was one he couldn't retreat from, and he would either be victorious or die trying. The rest of his men seemed to feel the same. Their spirits were rejuvenated at the prospect of the coming battle. Ironborn were meant to fight and conquer, not sit around too scared to fight the next battle. Most of the Iron Fleet was rowing out into the sea, getting the ships into battle formation. "Captain!" Ragnar Pike came running up to Victorian in a panic, holding a letter from a recently arrived raven. "Horus Redwyne is gone. A group of men somehow snuck into the castle and stole the boy before disappearing into the night," he explained. Victorian gripped his axe so tightly he swore he almost snapped the handle in half. "Tell those incompetent bastards on the mainland to send out every men they have and search every inch of that island," he said in a calm yet menacing tone. "Lord Captain." One of the scouts spotted a sailboat escaping from the harbor. "It's riding through the current by the shoreline to get away," shouted a crew member from a nearby boat. "That's gotta be them," said Pike. Victorian wasn't so certain, but he needed to catch that boat and retrieve Horus before the Redwyne learn of his escape. The fact that this happened just as Stannis Baratheon was arriving with the royal fleet couldn't be a coincidence. They were retreating to Stannis for safety. "After that ship. I want the entire fleet in pursuit," Victorian ordered. It didn't matter if they couldn't the ship or not, the battle was still going to commence. Still, they needed that boy alive if the Ironborn had any chance of winning this war. If they defeat Stannis and crush the royal fleet, only the Redwynes will be able to oppose them. Underscore 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 underscore. Gullen was exhausted as the group moved through the secret tunnels. Their mission was a success and they escaped back through the larder. It was doubtful the secret entrance would remain hidden much longer, as the Ironborn realized the intruders got through somehow and disappeared near the kitchens. Horrors was right beside him, probably the least exhausted of them all. Aside from Samandon, all of their armor had blood stains. Jamie and Bryndon took a few wounds, but other than that, it was all Ironborn blood. What amazed Garland the most was not how incredible fighters the men with him were, but how easy it was to kill another human being. The first man he killed was part of a patrol within the castle walls. The man went for Garland, but he remembered his training and deflected the incoming axe and countered with a slash that took off the man's jaw. Garland thought he would feel something when the man collapsed and was finished off with a stab to the chest, but he didn't. Killing was incredibly easy, so much so that it frightened him. He had heard about the atrocities committed in war and maybe was now starting to understand it. In battle, a part of you seemed to disappear. Questions of conduct and morality ceased from your mind as your survival nature took over. Then it all comes down to kill or be killed. So what was it like killing your first man? Asked Jamie. The Lannister had been pestering him with jokes of Garland losing his murder virginity the whole voyage to Fair Isle, so he clearly wanted to know what it was like for the Tyrell. Truthfully, it was very easy, replied Garland. Ironborn are overrated if you asked me, chuckled Jamie. Not that. It was very easy to kill another man, and it got even easier to kill the next man, admitted Garland. And that's the secret to being a real knight, smirked Jamie. Despite the smile, Garland could tell he wasn't joking. Underscore 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 underscore. Victorian grew more furious as the fleet attempted but failed to catch up to the escaping sailboat. The current allowed it to escape its pursuers without fear of any of the larger ships daring to attempt to navigate the treacherous rocks it ran by. Still, the Iron Fleet stayed within sight and the current couldn't be utilized forever. It would get larger and away from the shoreline, allowing the Ironborn longships to ride through it and catch up to their quarry. Whoever was on board had to know that and was probably going to disembark on the island before it, escaping into Fair Isle's woods. But the chase dragged on and still the sailboat moved along the current. Victorian grew more and more uneasy by the minute. Something wasn't right. Soon enough, the current moved away from the shoreline and out into the sunset sea. The Iron Fleet rode their ships onto it and closed the gap between their quarry. And yet the sailboat continued its pointless escape. Once it rounded a rocky outcrop, Victorian realized it wasn't so pointless and he made a fatal mistake. Waiting for them off in the distance was a massive fleet of ships with various sigils reflected on their sails, but the largest ship has a massive stag. It was impossible. There's no way Stannis Baratheon sailed his fleet past Fair Isle's tip so quickly. And to Victorian's horror, with them was a large number of ships with grapes on their sails. The Red Wine Fleet had joined them. Turn around! Turn around! Victorian screamed at his men and at any nearby ship that could hear him. He waved at the other captains he could see to retreat, but no one was listening to him. The Iron Fleet had grown restless and wanted a fight. Victorian understood their desire, but this was suicide. Stannis had put his large war galleys in the front of his lines. Ironborn longships would be crushed easily by them if they attacked head-on. They needed to use their speed and maneuverability to outflank the larger ships and pelt them with fire arrows from a distance. But the current was drawing the Iron Fleet right towards them and the captains were too eager for a fight to turn back now. Victorian wanted to close his eyes but couldn't as the first longships reached the war galleys. Just as he predicted, the Ironborn ships were easily smashed aside by the larger Royal Fleet. The smaller Red Wine ships formed a line beside the galleys, cutting off the Ironborn's escape and pelting them with fire arrows. Within a matter of minutes, half the Iron Fleet was either sinking or on fire. The Iron Victory and a few others had turned back, following Victorian's orders, but there was nothing for them left to do: escape, retreat, or share the fate of the others. Back to Pike, Victorian ordered. As his ship rode away from the battle, the enemy's plan formed into his mind. Stannis had someone attack the watchpost near the southern tip of the island while his fleet sailed out of sight from the shoreline and waited in position. Once the captured watchpost sent a raven saying he was on his way, the Iron Fleet prepared itself and emptying Fair Castle of its best fighters. This allowed a small unit of knights to enter the castle somehow and retrieve the red wine boy unharmed. Alarms were raised and the Ironborn started searching the nearby port where a small boat conveniently sailed away just in time to be suspicious. Victorian, believing his ships were hours away from the royal fleet reaching them, had the Iron Fleet pursue them. The fleet would have forcibly taken the boat and continued sailing south to engage Stannis before he expected them. But the boat rode through the coastline current which eventually got larger and turned away from the island, the perfect place to set a trap. One Victorian should have seen but didn't, and now all of the Iron Isle would pay for his mistake. Theon Greyjoy could hear them almost everywhere he went. The sound of thousands and thousands of men who had all gathered outside of Pike and made camp. Father had shut the gates and had his men stationed along the walls, but the attack hadn't come yet. Days passed as ravens from all along the Iron Isles brought terrible news. Theon would often stand outside his father's study and would hear what news the birds brought. Father, Uncle Victorian, and Theon's older brother Maron constantly argued and shouted at one another as the situation grew worse. One by one, the Iron Islands had fallen. Stannis Baratheon had subdued Great Wyk, Barristan Selmy took Old Wyk, Jaime Lannister had taken Saltcliffe, Randall Tully led the Tyrell army to conquer Harlaw while Benjen Stark took Blacktide and Hoster Tully led the conquest of Orkmont. The Lonely Light had surrendered to the Wolf King rather than risk his wrath, which left only Pike. All the might of Westeros landed on Pike's shores. Tywin Lannister was the first to arrive with a massive host and attacked with a vengeance. Botley Castle was destroyed along with the nearby town of Lordsport. Soon after, King Eddard Stark's army arrived and aided the Lannister host in decimating Father's forces that attempted a counterattack. They moved their army to besiege Pike. The expected attack had yet to arrive, and it wasn't until new banners were spotted in the camp that it made sense. One by one, King Eddard's other armies were joining up on Pike to join the final assault. Banners with the Tully Fish, Baratheon Stag, Tyrell Rose, and Stark Wolf flapped in the wind alongside the Lion and Crowned Direwolf. Ships bearing the Red Wine Great Cluster anchored offshore, cutting off any hope of escaping by sea. During their meals, Father told Theon that everything was fine and that the Ironborn could never be truly defeated. He spoke so confidently to his son's face, but yet Theon could hear the despair in his father's voice behind closed doors. The situation was growing more desperate by the day, and yet for Theon it was strangely calm. There was nothing he could do as everything was outside of his control. So Theon just seemed to accept it as events occurred, whether good or bad. He certainly didn't miss his brother Roderick, who died at Seaguard. Theon remembered the countless times his eldest brother would beat him for no good reason, especially when he was drunk. For once he was glad the old Ironborn saying was wrong. What was dead stayed dead. Theon headed to the battlements to see the army once more. Night had fallen, but the landscape was lit up by the thousands of torches spread out across the massive camp. Uncle Victorian estimated that 20,000 men were outside their gates. Knights, men-at-arms, and mercenaries had come from all over Westeros had to earn glory, fame, and riches. It might have been an incredible sight if they weren't here to fight Theon's family. He was young, but he knew the battle to come would be one-sided. Father and the Ironborn would make the Wolf King pay in blood for every inch they took of the castle, but in the end it would fall. "What you doing here?" asked someone coming up beside him. Of all the people that had to run into him up here, why did it have to be his older brother Maron? The man was just as cruel to Theon as Roderick was, though he preferred to verbally terrorize his younger brother instead of physically. "I asked you a question, you little bitch, now answer me," demanded Maron. He was drunk as usual. "I just came to look," said Theon. "At what?" "Those fucking Westerosi cunts. Eddard Stark and the fucking cocksuckers who all line up to lick his beloved royal ass," shouted Maron. While his older brother continued drunkenly shouting at the besieging army, Theon could hear a new noise. The sound of cranking metal replaced the loud voices from the besieging camp. New torches were lit, already brightening up the area, but now Theon noticed structures that weren't tents. At first he thought it was some kind of large lamps until the torches launched into the air, getting bigger as they soared closer and closer to the castle. Balls of flame passed overhead and crashed into Pike's towers with a thunderous loud explosion. Theon was almost knocked off his feet from the force of the impact and realized those weren't torches but projectiles from catapults. He heard about some siege weapons from stories and always wanted to see them in action. Seeing another wave of fireballs launched into the air, Theon regretted his wish coming true. "Move you cunt," shouted Maron, who headed towards the nearby tower to climb down. Theon chased after him. The castle shook from the impacts. Underscore 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 underscore. Jorah Mormont stood amongst the crowd who cheered. Yet another volley of trebuchets bombarded the walls. After spending days with no real action, the men were excited to finally witness something. The bombardment would continue through the night, and then tomorrow they would concentrate on a specific section of the outer wall to create a breach. Then everyone in the Seven Kingdoms seeking fame and glory would rush through it. The Ironborn would fight to the death, but the outcome wasn't in doubt. Within the next few days, King Eddard Stark's banners would fly over the walls of Pike. For the moment, however, the armies could only watch the bombardment display. Though Jorah doubted the Ironborn found it so entertaining. He sat amongst a group of knights, sellswords, and even highborn lords, all sitting and drinking together. They were preparing themselves, as they had all volunteered to be the first people who rushed through the breach. It was unlikely most of them would survive, but whoever did would earn untold fame and riches. Jorah could hear several knights, all bearing the sigils of Stark, Tyrell, Tully, and dozens of others, all bragging that they would be the first to step into Pike. But the one man everyone knew was going to step in front sat alone. Sir Gregor Clegane was so big, Jorah could scarcely believe he was even human. As rabid as the dogs on his sigil, Gregor was responsible for killing countless enemies of the Lannisters. His most infamous victims were the Rains of Castamaria, who tried to surrender, but Gregor slaughtered them regardless. Now that Eddard Stark was king, the Mountain's reputation seemed to dwindle. Perhaps he was fearful that the one man who defeated him could order his execution for any number of crimes and keep his atrocious acts quiet. If so, then perhaps Gregor wasn't the mindless beast everyone made him out to be. For the moment, the Mountain was sharpening his massive sword with a whetstone. Yet while anyone else would need two hands for hold it, Gregor used only one hand and held the largest shield Jorah ever saw with his other hand. But there was one man that Jorah found out of place. A bearded man with red hair that matched his red armor. His breastplate had no sigil of any kind, and the man had no squire or even a banner. Jorah figured him for a sellsword, but he didn't look like some great warrior from Essos. He was overweight and consistently drunk. He never once practiced with the others, instead dabbling with some kind of potions. No one really talked to him, and he didn't go out of his way to make anyone feel welcome. "You going to keep staring at me, or are you going to join me for a drink?" the man suddenly called out to Jorah. Jorah was startled at first, but then mentally kicked himself for staring too long. Soon enough he was having a drink with the mystery man. "Let me guess. You're a northerner," he said. "What makes you say that?" asked Jorah. "You have manners," chuckled the man. The two men shared a laugh. Jorah Mormont of Bear Island. Jorah introduced himself as he extended his hand. "Thoros of Myr, the man said as they shook. Now that was a familiar name. Thoros was a priest of the Urla, a religion popular in the eastern continent of Essos. While their worshippers were not unheard of in Westeros, they rarely made themselves publicly known to avoid being persecuted by the followers of the Seven. Thoros, however, was an exception. Sent from the free city of Myr, he arrived in King's Landing during the reign of King Aerys, hoping to convert him to the Lord of Light. Clearly that didn't work out, because soon the man joined up with Robert Baratheon's forces and fought with them during the Battle of the Trident. Nowadays he was mostly known for constantly winning melee tournaments with his flaming swords. "So my friend, do you plan on joining the rest of us in the slaughter?" inquired Thoros. "If by slaughter you mean all of us probably getting killed tomorrow, then yes," answered Jorah. "Don't feel so glum. Some of us might survive." Thoros shrugged, then filled up his wine cup again. "That's very reassuring," muttered Jorah. "At least we have somebody like him charging beside us." Thoros indicated Sir Gregor. The Mountain continued to slide a whetstone on his massive sword. He glared at Jorah with the same look a lion had before ripping a horse's throat out. "That's even more reassuring," gulped Jorah. underscore 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 underscore. Eddard Stark watched the bombing with a resigned feeling. He always hated war. He hated the violence, the blood, the screams of the dying, and everything else that happens in it. Robert Baratheon on the other hand loved it. During the war against Aes, Robert would constantly brag among his men of his victories at Summerhall and the Battle of the Bells. Ned's older brother was the exact same way. Brandon hadn't fought in massive battle like Robert, but he had his share of victories defeating bands of wildlings that crossed into the north. But Ned never bragged of any his victories and avoided any talk of it if he could. The truth was that his victories felt hollow. The Battle of the Trident was a victory, but Robert later died of his wounds. Ned lost his best friend that day, and while he managed to save the royal family during the sack of King's Landing, there was nothing to be proud of with what happened at the Tower of Joy. Arthur Dane, Gerald Hightower, and Oswell Went were great men, and Ned lost all of but Howland Reed fighting them to get to Lyanna. She died afterwards and left only her son Jon. To Ned, victory always seemed bittersweet. Standing beside him, Tywin Lannister seemed to glow in his golden and red armor. Ned's own royal armor seemed diminished by it, but that was perks of having as much money as House Lannister. You could afford to make armor that was better than the king's. Surrounding them were Brynden Tully, Barristan Semley, and Mandon Moore of the Kingsguard. Tywin's brothers Kevan and Geryon were present, dressed in their own elaborate armors, along with Stannis Baratheon and Ned's brother Benjen. "The castle won't last a fortnight," declared Tywin. "Maybe," said Benjen. "He has at least 600 men inside." "They will fight to the death," pointed out Barristan. "Then we'll have 600 Deadeye unborn." "Most people would consider that to be a public service," chuckled Geryon. The man was the opposite of his older brothers. Whereas Tywin and Kevan were mostly quiet and serious men, Geryon was loud and obnoxious. In the time Ned had spent around him, he always seemed to enjoy making a joke. Especially when Tywin was around. "Those 600 men will take a lot of our men with them to the grave," Brynden commented. Tywin turned to him. "And what would you suggest, Sir Brynden?" "Bombard them with siege weapons until their keeps crumble and everyone is dead inside. Or perhaps launch wildfire into the castle and let it burn into ashes." Brynden glared at him. "Do I look like you? It would be more than they deserve. If Balon truly cared for the welfare of the women and children in his castle, he should have sent them out. They would have been treated well. Now whatever happens to them is on his head," Stannis stated. "Enough," Ned ordered. "Balon had his chance to surrender. In the morning we take the castle by force. His victory would be bittersweet, but not as bitter as it would be for the Greyjoys." Underscore 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 underscore. The bombardment lasted throughout the night, and yet somehow Jorah managed to gain some sleep before the sun rose. When dawn arrived, Pike was nearly in shambles. The trebuchets had inflicted massive damage along the walls and towers, with more than one toppled. Of the 4 buildings that comprised the castle, the Great Keep had suffered the most, with the Bloody Keep also in ruins. The Kitchen Keep and Sea Tower, both situated on rock stacks sticking out of the sea, had their own scars, but for the most part stood strong. That wouldn't last once the Great Keep's walls collapse. In order to take Pike, one must take the Great Keep, then use it to get into the Bloody Keep and fight through it to the Kitchen Keep, and finally to the Sea Tower, where the Greyjoys were no doubt hiding away. There was no question that this would be a bloody battle, but the outcome was inevitable, and that gave Jorah hope. Everyone was getting suited up in armor, and by the time the trebuchets began bombarding one section of the Great Keep's wall, Jorah was among them. Gregor Clegane stood at the front with his great sword and massive shield. Thoros was clad in red armor with a flame sigil on his shield and a sword dipped in some kind of liquid. With each impact, the wall seemed to groan as if it was alive and trying to hold itself together. But another volley and the wall began to rumble. When it collapsed, dirt and plaster was shot into the air, creating a smoke screen that almost concealed the breach. The troops cheered, raising their swords and shields triumphantly, though Jorah didn't feel victorious. Now the real battle was going to begin. Thoros nodded to his squire, who was holding a light torch. With a simple touch, the torch set Thoros' sword ablaze. The Mirish man swung his flame-covered sword stylishly, driving everyone instinctively around him to back away, including the mountain. A horn blew from around the king's tent, signaling the attack. Thoros was the first to charge through the smoke, with the mountain and Jorah right behind him with hundreds of others after them. The instant they cleared the debris and stepped beyond the walls, arrows rained down on them. Jorah managed to raise his shield in time, but others weren't so lucky. He could hear shrieks of pain behind him. Drunken as he was last night, somehow Thoros managed to deflect the volleys of arrows launched at him and rushed towards an angry mob of Ironborn rushing to secure the breach. Yet for all their shouts of "what is dead may never die," all of them seemed to back away at the sight of Thoros' flaming sword. He rushed through them, hacking them apart one by one. Jorah realized it wasn't just the flaming sword trick that allowed the Mirish man to win those melee tournaments after all. Jorah quickly joined him, hacking a man's jaw off and then slicing another man's leg apart at the knee. Gregor came charging in like a bull, screaming in rage. With a single swing of his shield, the mountain knocked at least 5 men to the ground. His sword easily cleaved through armor, flesh, and bone. Yet as more and more men joined the fight, the Ironborn refused to retreat. This was a fight to the death, and they knew it. Jorah skewered a man on his sword and shoved the body into an oncoming attacker, knocking him down. With the body trapped on top of him, the man was helpless as Jorah shoved his sword through the corpse and into his attacker. Once the Ironborn spat out blood, Jorah removed his sword and continued onwards. Underscore 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 underscore. The fighting went on through the rest of the day. Every tower and room needed to be searched and secured, a time-consuming process that too often led to ambushes of Ironborn hoping to take any people with them before they met their drowned god. 7 years ago, Ned would have been on the front lines fighting alongside his men. But that was a different time when Eddard had different responsibilities. Wearing a crown changed a great many things. Now Ned wouldn't afford to put himself in danger, not with Robb still so young and not ready for the responsibility. He also made a promise to Catelyn to come home alive, and that overruled any desire to put himself in harm's way. As the sun began to set, 3 of the keeps were taken. The Great Keep, Bloody Keep, and Kitchen Keep were secured and cleared of any opposition. Ned was told a great many civilians were killed during the fighting, but that was a sad reality when it came to war. He couldn't very well punish anyone for it because it was probably complete chaos and there would be no way for certain what really happened. The one casualty of the Ironborn that was recognizable was Maron Greyjoy, who had been killed when one of the towers collapsed during the bombardment earlier. Hundreds of men died to claim portions of the castle, and now only the sea tower remained. The Greyjoys were locked up inside, having severed the wooden bridge to their last tower. It was an act of defiance but pointless. All this did was forestall the inevitable. Victory was all but assured. "Your Grace," a page came running up into Ned's tent. Brynden and Barristan allowed the boy to pass, recognizing him. Several Ironborn holding white banners were spotted on the sea tower. "They claimed that Balon Greyjoy has requested an audience with you to discuss terms," the boy reported. Tywin, Benjen, Stannis, and everyone else all turned their gaze towards their king. "Tell the Ironborn that I will permit Balon to enter the Kitchen Keep unharmed to discuss terms with him, but it must be with Balon Greyjoy or not at all," commanded Ned. The page nodded and rushed out of the tent. "I want all of you to join me," Ned told his lords. Underscore 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 underscore. The large hall inside the Kitchen Keep, normally used for dining hundreds of guests, was chosen for the talks. Ned was the first to arrive, surrounded by the great lords of his kingdom. Benjen wasn't sure why his brother wanted them to witness this, but he must have his reasons. They had to wait nearly half an hour before Balon arrived with a few guards. The man wasn't risking any more of his family, and Benjen had to admire that. The so-called king of the Iron Islands looked somewhat pale, as if perhaps the war drained the life out of him. "Your Grace," Balon told Ned before bowing his head. Brynden and Stannis were disgusted, and rightfully so. The man creates untold chaos in the Seven Kingdoms when he thought he was safe, and now that he wasn't, Balon seems to have remembered his courtesies. "Sit," Ned told him. With just a single word, Benjen's brother told Balon just how he felt about the man. He didn't address Balon as a king or even a lord, just a traitor that disgusted him. Balon wordlessly took a seat at a small table, and Ned sat down opposite him. They stared at each other for a moment, neither uttering a single word. "You came for terms?" Ned finally spoke. "Yes," nodded Balon. "I will give up my crown, swear fealty to you in front of all these lords, and pay waif." The man started to offer. Ned didn't let him finish. "This is what you will do. You will order the last of your men to lay down their swords and surrender. You will next send ravens to all your lords, informing them to release all of their thralls and sold wives. They will be sent back to their homes unless they wish to remain here. If they chose to do so, then they are to be paid a fair wage for their work. The remnants of the Iron Fleet will be confiscated and given to Lord Tywine to help rebuild his fleet at Lannisport. The rest of your longships will be confiscated as well and dispersed among the various lords whose lands your people have raided and pillaged. From this day on, the Iron Isles will not be allowed to have more than 30 longships. Any one of your lords that disobey this command and construct more will be dealt with severely. Every lord of the Iron Isles must also set aside funds as restitution for their crimes and given to the victims of their raids. I am told your youngest son Theon still lives. He will be taken to be a ward of someone of my choosing." Benjen swore. Balon grew paler with every new demand from his brother. And yet what could he do? If he refused, the man was finished. "Is there anything else?" Balon asked. "Yes. Your life," Ned answered. The whole was dead silent. "Your lords followed your commands, and so you bear the responsibility of their crimes and treasons. And for this, you will die." "And if I refuse," snapped Balon, "I will sow salt in your fields, burn your docks, and destroy your villages until Pike will be nothing but a barren rock. Then I will rip down your walls and banish whatever remains of your family from Westeros under pain of death." Ned rose from his seat with a voice that Benjen found frightening. Now he knew why Ned brought so many of the lords with him here. He wanted them to see this and know that this was their fate if they ever rebelled against him. This was a different man from the one Benjen grew up with in Winterfell. Balon was silent for a long time until he bowed his head. "Very well, Your Grace." Ned turned and walked out, not saying another word. Benjen and the rest of the High Lords followed him out. There was a new look among each of them, and it was all the same. It was a look of both respect and fear. Some hide it better than others, like Tywine and Stannis, but Benjen knew his brother struck fear in every last one of their hearts. Underscore 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 underscore. Theon tried to hold back the tears once his father told him and Asha. Father was going to die and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Asha screamed and shouted angrily. She wanted them to keep on fighting. Father told her to be quiet, had Uncle Victorian take her to her room. "Theon, look at me," Father commanded sternly once they were alone. Theon looked him in the eye. "Don't cry for me, boy. Avenge me. When the time is right, I want you to bring our people back to the old way. It may take time, perhaps not even in your lifetime. But you promise me that you and your children will wait until the time is right and then forge a new Iron Crown. Now swear it to me, boy," Father commanded. "I swear," nodded Theon. "I expect you to accomplish great things by the time you join me in the halls of the drowned god. Don't you ever cry. A Greyjoy doesn't cry. Especially my son and heir," ordered Balon. Underscore 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 underscore. A few days passed until every lord of the Iron Isles was assembled outside the torn walls of Pike. Also every great lord and knight who fought for Ned was also there to witness the justice they had fought so hard for. Everyone from Jaime Lannister, Mace Tyrell, Randyll Tully, Tywin Lannister, Hoster Tully, Stannis Baratheon, Benjen, and so many others. Ned was dressed in his royal armor with his family's Valyrian sword ice in hand. He was standing on a scaffold that had been constructed for the event. Balon walked out without chains or bindings of any kind, flanked by Brynden and Mandon Moore. He knew he had no choice in this matter and seemed to accept his death. The lords of the Iron Isles were disheartened by the sight of their king walking up the wooden steps to his execution. He came to a halt in front of Ned and glared at his executioner. "Do you have any last words?" Ned asked him. "What is dead may never die. You may kill me here and now, but you can never destroy us. One day my family will repay yours for this," spat Balon. He didn't need help as he laid his head on the chopping block willingly. "Then they will suffer the same fate as you," Ned told him before lifting his sword and swinging it down. The streets of Lannisport were packed as preparations for the celebration were underway. After Balon Greyjoy's death, King Eddard along with most of his lords and their armies withdrew from the Iron Islands. A token force remained to maintain the peace, but the fact was the war was over. Lord Tywin announced a tourney at Lannisport to celebrate the Wolf King's victory, and now thousands from all over the Seven Kingdoms had arrived to join the festivities. Some were merchants setting up shop and already were competing for positions on the streets. Pavilions and tents had been raised outside the city, surrounding the construction for the jousting and melee field. It was said that a grand melee consisting of hundreds of mounted knights would be used to start the celebrations. Renly Baratheon was glad he wasn't among the participants. Though he was trained since he was a toddler to use a sword, he took no pleasure in it. It might have to do with his older brother Stannis. Though Renly lived in Storm's End most of his life and Stannis spent the past 7 years in King's Landing, the elder brother insisted that his castellan Axel Florent made Renly train every day. Stannis's brother-in-law was merciless in his training, and Renly more often than not would leave his training sessions with bruises and injuries. Renly tried writing to his brother, telling him of the abuse, but Stannis didn't believe him. The damn Florents were like weeds in Renly's home, more and more would always sprout up. Ever since Stannis's marriage to Slyss Florent, House Florent has dug their claws into Storm's End. Renly swore there were more of them there than in their own home of Brightwater Keep. With Stannis gone, the family had taken over the Baratheon castle and they had no love for Renly. Fortunately for him, Stannis had Renly's squire for Sir Courtenay Penrose away from Storm's End. The man was stern, but his lessons weren't torture. Renly had to admit the past few years under his tutelage was better than it ever living in his family's home with the Florents. And now he had come with Courtenay not to join the festivities but rather be knighted. He was among several planned for receive the honor personally from King Eddard himself. Jorah Mormont, Garland Tyrell, Patrek Mallister, Jacelyn Bywater and many others were being honored for their valor and deeds during the war. Though Renly hadn't fought in the war, Courtenay sent a letter requesting Ned Stark for the honor. Having the king knight anyone is a great honor, and King Stark rarely refused to grant it. Renly suspected the king wanted to do this as a favor for his old friend Robert. They were supposedly as close as brothers, and so the historians claim. There were times Renly wished he could have a brother like that instead of Stannis. Anyone would be better than him. The inns were beginning to fill up quickly, but Renly and Courtenay didn't have to worry about that. They would be staying at Casterly Rock, which loomed over the city on a large stone hill nearby. All the great lords and ladies along with the royal family would stay there during the celebrations. After passing by Lannisport, Renly and Courtenay along with several retainers made the short trip to Casterly Rock. The castle seemed small by Westeros standards, but you were only seeing part of it. Most of the mighty fortress was underground with tunnels and passageways carved out beneath in the stone hill beneath it. According to legend, most of those tunnels were originally built by miners looking for gold, but over time they were strengthened and expanded into halls and chambers. The first thing you realize as you get closer to it is how heavily defended just the entrance road was. A single narrow path was the only way to enter the keep at the top of the hill safely. Otherwise you would need climbing spikes and a lot of luck. The path had at least a dozen watchtowers situated off to the sides. Archers were no doubt fortified inside each one, ready to shoot intruders through arrow slits as they attempt to pass by. Past the watchtowers was the Lion's Mouth, a massive gate at the entrance of the castle. Its name was all you needed to know what it was shaped like. "Who comes before the Lion's Mouth?" shouted the guard on top of the gate. It was the traditional question asked to anyone who would pass through. Sir Courtenay Penrose of Parchments and Renly Baratheon of Storm's End Penrose announced to the guards. Almost immediately the gate opened, allowing the entourage to enter the courtyard. There was no waiting to greet them, but that wasn't surprising. They had arrived sooner than expected. 2 knights were clashing swords. The older one was dressed in golden armor with blonde hair, while the younger one had brown hair with green armor. "You're tiring, old man," laughed the Green Knight. "Because you're boring me, assbud," chuckled the Golden Knight. The two continued their little tirade, along with taking swipes at each other while Renly and Penrose dismounted. Renly couldn't help but continuing watching the knights as their moves and counterattacks became faster and more elaborate. He had been studying under Penrose's tutelage for years, but he was nowhere near as good as those two. The way they fought was like the knights you hear in legends. "Renly," a familiar voice shouted. He turned to see King Eddard Stark walking towards him with a smile on his face. Behind him were several men dressed in Kingsguard armor and a man dressed in Lannister silk. Everyone quickly bowed their heads as he approached. At ease, Ned told them all before embracing Renly. The man had been a close friend ever since ascending to the throne. Though the king wasn't always around him, Renly knew he was keeping an eye on him to make sure he was well. Whenever he visited the capital, Ned was friendlier than any lord Renly had visited in his travels. He wished the king was his brother instead of that damned Stannis. Perhaps Ned felt obligated to be that brother ever since Robert's death. "You look well," Ned commented as they broke apart. "So the maidens of Westeros say," chuckled Renly. The two shared a laugh as everyone returned to their duties around them. The 2 knights resumed their bout while servants took the horses away to the stables. "Welcome to Casterly Rock, my lord. My name is Kevan Lannister, and should you require anything, do not hesitate to ask me," said Ned's Lannister escort. Technically Renly wasn't a lord, but it was an honorary title for an esteemed guest. Penrose stepped forward. "My men are hungry and thirsty, my lord. May we have something to eat now, as we skipped lunch?" "Of course. I'll arrange for our cooks to prepare something for you while you get settled into your rooms," said Kevan. "If it's all right with you, my lord, I want some time with Renly," Ned told Penrose. Penrose bowed his head. "Of course, your grace. Underscore 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 underscore. Garland couldn't help but keep an eye on the king and Renly as they walked off. Jaime took advantage and clocked him in the face. The next thing Garland knew, he was lying face down on the ground with Jaime standing above him with both of their swords in his hands. "Am I boring you, assbud?" chuckled Jaime. The Lannister seemed to enjoy tormenting Garland with that nickname. "I wasn't aware his grace was so close to Lord Renly," Garland stated. "Maybe he misses that loudmouth Robert. Though I'm sure he misses him more after putting up with Stannis. The statues in the stone garden have more personality than him," chuckled Jaime. Garland smiled at the jest but was more concerned with other things. The Tyrells had long wanted a way to strengthen ties with the king, but he didn't seem to play favorites when it came to the noble houses. Perhaps they were going about this in the wrong way. Maybe they needed to befriend someone else instead. "So who's this girl your old man is always spouting on about marrying you? I swear every time he gulps down a couple sips of wine, he won't shut up about her," asked Jaime. "Lady Leonette of House Fossoe," answered Garland. "Which one? I seem to recall there were 2 of houses with the same name." "Bloody confusing if you ask me, and no one gives a shit about distinguishing the 2 of them anyways," chuckled Jaime. "I don't know. I never asked him," replied Garland. Jaime frowned at him. "Do you at least know what she looks like? Kind of important to know if the broodmare you're getting stuck with is fuckable." "I never asked," sighed Garland. The Lannister busted up laughing. "Wow, you're really looking forward to meeting this wench. For all you know, she could be the size of an aurochs with a gap between her teeth and enough freckles to make you want to stab out your eyes." "Doesn't matter what I want. Father's already decided on the matter." "I'm sure he made a great decision." Garland glared at him. I thought the same way when I was told I was going to marry Lysa Tully. She wasn't ugly mind you, but she was clinging and needy. The one time I met her she wouldn't shut up about marrying some handsome young lord and bringing his beautiful children into the world. I didn't know then my father wanted us to marry, but I already had my fill of her. If her mouth was any indication of who she was, then I didn't want to go anywhere near her, cunt, explained Jamie. Is that why you joined the King's Guard? To get out of a marriage? Asked Garland. Somewhat, admitted Jamie. But how could you set aside your birthright? Casterly Rock and the wealth of House Lannister, inquired Garland. I could care less for any of it. Let someone else have the gold and the oversized castle. I don't want it, answered Jamie. But your predicament is far easier than mine was. You don't stand to inherit anything at all. Garland was starting to understand what he was saying, and the thought had crossed his mind before. To be counted among the likes of Arthur Dane, Barristan Selmy, Drold Hightower, Ryam Redwine, and Aemon the Dragon Knight was every young boy's dream. The difference was that Garland had the skills to join the ranks of the King's Guard. Everyone told him how much a natural he was with a sword, and his latest mission, rescuing his cousin Horace, only seemed to prove it. Barristan Selmy himself congratulated him on his prowess. I don't think that would go over too well with my father. Garland shook his head. Jamie groaned. Do you need to ask his permission every time you take a piss, daddy's boy? He says he'll make me a lord sometime and give me a holdfast, Garland replied, starting to get irritated by his friend's jests. That's what he wants. What do you want? Asked Jamie. I don't want anything. I just want to protect my family, admitted Garland. Oh, cut the act. No one admires a Baelor the Blessed except peasants and maesters, groaned Jamie. Barristan's been looking for someone to replace the last one who died. Can't remember his name, only the way he died. Quite embarrassing when you break your neck falling from your horse after it slips on a pile of shit. I'm sure his last entry in the White Book didn't go into too much detail regarding his death, remarked Garland. Jamie's dark sense of humor was starting to rub off on him. Glad you're growing a sense of humor now. Back to my original question. What do you want? Asked Jamie. You want the truth. I don't know what I want, sighed Garland. I never cared about having a castle or some fancy title. I just wanted to be a knight. Ironic how his words were so similar to Jamie's. Maybe they had more in common than Garland suspected. That's probably why they were able to get along so well. Then be one. Do that whole life to the fullest thing everyone preaches. Just choose carefully though. The vows are for life, reminded Jamie. Garland was going to respond when a horn blew over the courtyard, a warning that someone was approaching the lion's mouth. It was probably just another lord arriving for the tourney, but the guards were preparing themselves regardless. The soldiers in Casterly Rock were as disciplined as the ones in Horn Hill. Tywin Lannister and Randall Tarly had something in common, it would seem. Garland and Jamie continued their sparring until the gates opened to allow a retinue of knights escorting a wheelhouse into the courtyard. They all bore the Tyrell sigil on their shields, and a small knight had silver armor covered in an exotic flower motif. Garland wasn't expecting his family to arrive so soon, but he couldn't have cared less for not having a proper welcoming retinue. He raced over to the arriving party, dropping his tourney sword behind him. That's forfeiting, you coward, Jamie jokingly called out to him. Brother, the small knight in fancy armor called out to Garland. He removed his helmet to reveal himself. Loras wasn't even a squire yet, but already the boy looked like a knight. Father bought him the armor on his last name day. Garland thought his younger brother shouldn't be getting such armor as his age, and yet here he was moving around in it like a second skin. Loras dismounted and quickly rushed over to embrace his older brother. Gods, you've gotten big, Garland laughed as they separated. Stop adding to that boy's delusions, Garland. He's not a knight yet, though the knowledge is lost on your oath of a father, called out a familiar voice. The first one to disembark the wheelhouse was Olenna Tyrell, Garland's smart-mouthed and quick-witted grandmother. Beside her, Garland's mother Aelary Tyrell and Garland's younger sister Margaery soon followed. Ignoring his grandmother's comments, Garland immediately walked up to his mother and gave her a long embrace. Mother was almost in tears. She wrote to her son quite frequently, but reading words on a page wasn't the same as face-to-face. Look at you. As handsome as your father was at your age, Mother told him. Don't be ridiculous, Aelary. My son was never that good-looking, scoffed Olenna. Grandmother Margaery chastised her but with a slight smile. The youngest of the Tyrell children ironically was the smartest of them all. While Garland, Loras, and Willers before his injury spent their childhood learning how to fight with a sword, Margaery learned how to fight with her mind. Sharpened and honed by their grandmother, Garland's sister was the crown jewel of House Tyrell, and anyone who married her would belong to her and not the other way around. Margaery would see to that. "Good to see you, sister," Garland greeted her as Margaery kissed his cheek. "Staying in good company, my boy," Olenna said, referring to the approaching Jaime Lannister. "I can introduce myself. Sir Jaime Lannister." My lady. Jaime bowed his head. "Jaime, this is my brother Loras, my mother Aeleri, my sister, Margaery, and my grandmother Olenna." Garland introduced his family. "Are the Kingslayer." "I always found that nickname to be a strange insult considering how many people celebrated Aerys' death," commented Olenna. "Mother, please," sighed Aeleri. "Don't call me Mother, Aeleri. I would have remembered if you popped out between my legs," retorted Olenna. Garland noticed a look between Jaime and Margaery. He didn't have time to ask before two massive knights who dismounted from their horses and stood vigil around his grandmother. Both were 7 feet tall at least and decked in heavy armor with massive two-handed great swords. "Who are they?" Garland asked. "Left and right. I'm sure they have other names. Maybe Boring's one like Hubert Organel, but left and right I find stands out more. Plus I can't tell the difference between them anyways," remarked Olenna. "Mother, Loras, would you two be so kind as escort our grandmother inside? I'm sure she's weary from the journey," smiled Margaery. "I'm allowed to be weary at my age, though it's your father who's giving me grey hair with his little schemes," Olenna said as Aeleri and Loras escorted her inside. "What was that about?" asked Garland. "You know grandmother never likes when father does anything without her permission," chuckled Margaery. She turned to Jaime. "My lord, it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance." Jaime seemed uncomfortable, which only raised Garland's concerns. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Father didn't tell you about the betrothal." Margaery frowned. Garland nearly choked when he realized what she meant by that. He turned back to Jaime, who held up his hands. "It's not my fault you don't attend dinners between our fathers." "I assumed you knew," protested Jaime to his future brother-in-law. Underscore 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 underscore. The air felt strange to Arianne Martell. It felt cool but yet warm enough to not require a coat. Technically it was winter, but it was a mild one and many believed it would pass quickly. Maesters were already calling it the false winter. Arianne personally was just grateful the tourney was happening during mild weather. Winters in Dawn were practically spring compared to what the northern kingdoms endured. Yet Arianne couldn't help but feel excited. This was one of the few times she was so far from Sunspear. She spent practically all her life there. Finally, after wearing her father down, Arianne was going to a real tourney, and it was expected to be the biggest celebration event since the tourney of Harrenhal. Hopefully it ends less controversial. But she wasn't just here for pleasure. The only real reason father allowed her to go was to finally meet Willers Tyrell. He was traveling up from Highgarden with the rest of his family to celebrate his brother Garland's knighting. It made for the perfect excuse to meet each other. The two had written letters to one another, but reading parchments wasn't the same as a face-to-face meeting. Arianne blamed her uncle Oberyn for setting them up. He was good friends with Willers and said on more than one occasion that the Tyrell was the only suitor worthy of her time. The fact that Willers got Oberyn's approval said something about him. Of course, everything Arianne knows about him mostly came from other people. They all said he was handsome, comely, smart, and the usual compliments. The fact that he was a cripple meant nothing to Arianne. But any kind of betrothal would be more businesslike than romantic. Willers was the heir to Highgarden and Arianne the heir to Dawn. Such a union would create an alliance between the Tyrells and Martells despite the previous bad blood. Oberyn was the one who knocked Willers off his horse, which caused his injury, but it wasn't intentional and the Tyrell held no grudge. His father Mace was another story. Arianne hoped that a face-to-face meeting alongside his son could calm the Lord of Highgarden's temperament and let him see reason. As much as she would hate it, Arianne would be staying at Casterly Rock. Personally, she'd rather sleep in a brothel like Oberyn did most places he visited. But Willers and the rest of the Tyrells would be staying there as well, so it was more convenient just to endure the Lannisters' hospitality. Of course, they weren't the only people Arianne looked forward to seeing. Her retinue passed through the Lion's Gate, and judging from the crowd, the Dornish had arrived just after the royal family. The king was greeting his queen and children. Arianne remembered meeting Prince Robb during her last visit to the capital, but the two girls she had to guess were Princess Sansa and Princess Arya. The others with them were family of another sort. Jon Snow had blood ties to the Starks and Targaryens. As Rhaenys's and Aegon's half-brother, he was as welcome in Dorne as any true-born. Daenerys on the other hand was an outsider. Rhaenys had described her as such in her letters and said she always felt sorry for her aunt. It wasn't easy being the daughter of a monster, especially one that murdered members of the king's own family. Still, King Eddard had always treated her with kindness. Rhaenys was accompanied as always by her cousins. Oberyn's sand snakes had a fierce reputation, but Arianne had always loved them like her own sisters during their time at Sunspear. Over the years her uncle would bring one after another to Sunspear, and they were always welcomed with open arms. As soon as the king departed with his family to get situated to their rooms, the sand snakes made their way to Arianne and one by one gave her a fierce hug. "You don't visit us enough," Nymeria complained. "It's not my fault you don't come back south," chuckled Arianne. "So what brings you to the Lion's Den, cousin?" asked Tywin. "Business and pleasure," replied Arianne. "More like meeting Sir One-Legged Flowers," chuckled Oberyn. Arianne glared at her. The eldest among the sand snakes always did have the most prickly and hot-tempered compared to the rest of her sisters. "A man, Uncle Oberyn is quite fond of cousin Arianne," reminded her. "Only because he feels sorry for him being the son of the Fat Flower," muttered Oberyn. Her hatred of Mace Tyrell was more understandable. "Just behave yourself. Especially around the Lannisters," Arianne requested. A tall order, and one she had to endure herself. "Easier said than done," Rhaenys said as she joined the rest of them. The cousins embraced each other and then followed the future queen away to a more secluded area of the yard with the rest of the sand snakes. Away from prying ears, Arianne recounted tales of the past few years of her life and admitted the real reason she came, though she would prefer the others stay silent. Not that there was much risk of them admitting something to Mace Tyrell, but someone from the Lannisters might hear and decide to muddy the waters. Someone of Martell blood was going to be queen one day, and the last thing the Lions wanted was another one securing the Reach in marriage. "And how is the little prince?" asked Arianne. Everyone wanted to know anything that was related to the future king and Rhaenys's betrothed. Arianne once told her cousin that Robb was smitten with her and she needed to utilize it. Don't just be a royal broodmare, but someone who was actually important. Advise him on matters and convince him when he was wrong. A queen's power came through her husband, so she needed to control him. Rhaenys sighed. "He's been better. Being away from his father all this time didn't do him any favors. Whatever's eating away at him, he won't talk to anyone about it. Not even Jon." "I'm surprised you haven't tried to get him to open up," commented Arianne. "This isn't something I can talk to him about. He needs to speak to his father," replied Rhaenys. Underscore 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 underscore. Ned had never been so happy to see his family. The past several months had been spent mostly traveling and waiting. All the while his wife and children, Natural and Foster, were all forced to carry on with their lives without him. He had been with them their whole lives, so being away like this must have been difficult for them. Daenerys was in tears when he left, and Robb was depressed after that incident with the beggar. It wasn't his fault, but guilt sometimes wasn't always rational. Catelyn told their son wasn't opening up to anyone and yet seemed to be thriving in his lessons. Maester Gorman said he's never seen Robb so determined to learn. Ned understood exactly what was happening. After he heard of his father and brother's deaths, the kid inside of him died, and someone worthy of the title Lord of Winterfell emerged from within. He set aside his old habits and desires and concentrated on learning how to carry out his family's ancient legacy and duty. Many people claimed Ned never smiled during Robert's rebellion or after. That wasn't true, but the belief wasn't without merit. Ned had a hole inside of him, and no matter how many happy moments he had with his wife and children, nothing would ever fill it. Arya was just as energetic as ever and was already driving her nannies insane. She seemed to only behave whenever Catelyn was in the room. Sansa and Daenerys were in tears when they saw Ned, and he had to carry the two of them around after they hugged him together and refused to let go. He didn't mind though, he missed them too. When he could finally detach himself from the girls, the reunited family had dinner. The children wanted to know everything that happened, especially tales of the battles. Ned recounted the events but made sure to keep the details age-appropriate. He told how Barristan Selmy, Jaime Lannister, Garland Tyrell, Mandan Moore, Brynden Tully, and Sandor Clegane undertook a daring rescue of Horace Redwyne. How Stannis Baratheon and Davos Seaworth led the mighty Iron Fleet into an ambush and won a great victory that sealed victory in the War for the Seven Kingdoms. The children hung on every word, listening with excitement as they were told of the victory over the Ironborn. Hours later, after most of the children were off playing or exploring Casterly Rock's depths, Eddard took Robb to the Stone Gardens and asked the Kingsguard for some privacy. Alone and away from prying ears, the two could finally have the conversation they needed to have months ago. "Maester Gorman tells me you've been doing well," Ned said. "I've been trying to do my best," nodded Robb. "I know why. The same thing happened to me when your grandfather and uncle perished and Winterfell passed to me. I couldn't be a boy anymore, not when I had responsibilities to live up to," said Ned. "But you didn't get someone killed," protested Robb. "That man didn't die because of you. The guilt you're feeling is unwarranted, but I'm sorry to say that I am somewhat grateful you feel it," admitted Ned. His son frowned at him, confused. "You feel this way because you care, and that's something a crown and throne tends to strip away from you. Never blame yourself when such things happen, but don't ever feel ashamed for feeling what you do. Too many kings before us didn't care enough. It's not just Targaryens or Lannisters but Starks as well." "I do care, father, and that's why I want to ask you to sit at the small council meetings," admitted Robb. Now it's Ned's turn to be confused. "I won't say anything at any of them. I promise." "But I need to know how to be a king," insisted Robb. "You're nearly 8 years old, Robb. You're supposed to be playing with wooden swords and making your tutors' lives miserable." Ned tried to make light of the situation. "I won't be a boy forever, father, and winter is coming," Robb echoed his family's words. Ned considered his next words carefully. Robb was still just a boy, and Ned wanted him to enjoy his childhood while he still could. But at the same time, Robb did have a point. He was the heir to the throne and needed to be ready. There was no telling how much longer Ned was destined to remain in this world. All it took was a slight accident, disease, or countless other ways to die, and Robb would be sitting on the throne immediately. There were plenty of good men at the capital that would aid him, but still Ned wanted him to at least be prepared for the responsibility. "All right. You can observe the meetings but say nothing. Whatever questions you have during them you ask me afterwards. Do you understand?" asked Ned. Robb nodded in response. "And don't tell your mother about this. I'll break the news to her myself. At least this way she'll only kill me and not both of us," joked Ned. The two of them shared their first laugh together in a long time. Wood clashed against steel as the crowd erupted. Cersei Lannister couldn't help but snigger as Black Walder Free was knocked off his horse and collapsed into the mud. That's exactly where he and the rest of his family deserve to be. Aunt Jenna might have married one of them, but only because grandfather was a fool. That family of weasel-faced upstarts didn't deserve a match with such a prominent family. Thankfully father hadn't pawned her away as such. If father had, Cersei probably would have killed her husband in his sleep. Assuming Jaime didn't kill him first. Uncle Geryon Lannister held up his broken lance as he galloped around the field, the whole crowd cheering for him. The people of the Westerlands always did love him. Not as much as father though. Cersei had no real hatred for her uncle, but found it annoying he would always seem to spend more in local taverns than as court in Casterly Rock. Geryon always claimed that politics of the family bored him. They bored Cersei as well, but at least she didn't degrade herself by consorting with commoners and having a bastard child. Beside her Tyrion clapped with a smile on his face. Geryon always did have a soft spot for that little wretch. It unnerved Cersei that she needed to seated next to that Grumpkin, but it was expected they be seated together. As the host of the tourney, the Lannisters were seated next to the Starks with father seated at King Eddard's right. It was an awkward arrangement to say the least. Father and the king had little love for each other, but the two remained courteous around one another. The same couldn't be said for Cersei and Tyrion, who have been whispering subtle insults the whole time. Cersei would have preferred to sit with Jaime, but unfortunately he was jousting himself. You enjoy this so much. Perhaps you should try your hand at it. At least you'd give the peasants something to amuse themselves to, suggested Cersei. It would get quite a laugh, but not as much as you would get showing off your flat tits, chuckled Tyrion. Cersei had to resist strangling the little wretch. By the seven, if Jaime didn't love this little monster so much. The crowd cheered as the next contestants rode their steeds onto the field. Cersei didn't recognize either of them, so clearly they weren't very important. One was dressed in northern armor with the fur coat over top metal plate. A sigil of a bear flapped on the side of his horse. The other had an old worn-down armor covered in runes. Normally Cersei would have picked the southern rider for victory, but clearly the Northman was only one here dressed appropriately. Sir Jorah Mormont of Bear Island will take the field against Lord Yohn Royce of Runestone, the herald announced. Cersei had actually heard of House Royce. They were the second most powerful family in the Vale and was said to be House Arryn's most trusted ally. On the other hand, Cersei had never heard of House Mormont. She barely knew any northern houses, as most weren't worth remembering. Aside from the Starks, Karstarks, Marndaelis, and Boltons, no other family in the north really mattered. The challengers raced past each other, the first pass barely grazing one another. The crowd awed and gasped. Show them a monkey that can dance and they'd probably do the same. Commoners were so easily amused. Mormont and Royce charged again. This time the Northman took a hit to the shield but managed to stay on his horse. The third pass Mormont made his move, shattering his own lance as he stuck Royce in the chest plate. The Lord of Runestone struggled to hold on but lost his balance and tumbled to the ground. The crowd cheered as Mormont rode around the field holding up his broken lance victoriously. I'm going to need to keep an eye on that one, Tyrion commented. Don't tell me you actually think some nameless Northman will actually win this, scoffed Cersei. Just because he's not from a famous family doesn't mean he can't go far. This man wants to win and I think he will. I haven't seen someone ride like that since Jaime rode in his first tourney as a Kingsguard, Tyrion replied. Only someone like you could compare that to our brother, sighed Cersei. Jaime would have taken that as a compliment. Valor and courage are two traits he's always envied. You on the other hand always envied everything because you don't have anything worth boasting over. Well, except for your cheekbones, retorted Tyrion. If they weren't out in public, Cersei would have slapped him right there. Her eyes wandered to Robb Stark, a small boy who was destined at birth only to be lord of the frozen tundra they call the North. And look at him now, a prince destined to rule the Seven Kingdoms. How could that happen? Then again, how could Aerys Targaryen not agree to marry his son Prince Rhaegar to Cersei? She was born to be Rhaegar's queen, anyone in the Red Keep at the time could attest to this. It was the perfect match. Instead, the Mad King lived up to his name by marrying the prince to Elia Martell. Cersei didn't really believe in the gods after her mother died, but that insane action only proved they didn't matter even if they did exist. How could let something like that happen if they were truly just? And now history, it seemed, was repeating itself. Nearby, seated with her mother, Robb's betrothed Rhaenys had been cheering every time a Dornishman was riding the lists. What could she hope to offer the Stark dynasty? Legitimacy. It wasn't like the Starks had any legitimate claim to the throne as it was. Truthfully, Stannis Baratheon had the real claim, considering he was Robert's younger brother, but who would support him? He didn't have the Lannisters' gold, the Tyrells' massive army, the Martells' fierce archer cavalry, or really anything to truly elevate his family above the other great houses. His only real claim was that his grandmother was a Targaryen, and look how well that helped him. The royal blood in his veins didn't aid him any more than it would make Rhaenys a real queen. But the little Targaryen wasn't the true center of Cersei's wrath. That belonged to the little Tyrell whore. Margaery was seated along with her mother, grandmother, and cousins. A whole assortment of roses and thorns. Margaery hasn't even flowered yet, and despite that tried to appear like a woman. Does she really think marrying Jaime will make her special? The thought that this little harlot will one day have the same title as mother once did infuriated Cersei. Joanna Lannister was the greatest lady of Casterly Rock in living memory, and now that little Rose was being given the same honor as her was insulting. And it wasn't just the whore that made Cersei irate. Jaime simply accepted the betrothal without a single word of protest. What happened to him? He used to be the proud lion Cersei would dream of marrying. Fuck the faith and their laws of incest. Those same laws didn't stop the Targaryens. They were made exceptions to the rules, just as the Lannisters should be. And yet Jaime had lost his passion and zeal. He would spend so much time with Tyrion and father when he should be with Cersei. Needing to learn how to rule, he says. What happened to the same Jaime who gladly threw away his own inheritance and joined the Kingsguard just to be with Cersei? She was supposed to be queen at the time, but things didn't work. Cersei left the Red Keep with father while Jaime stayed behind to serve Aes. Then after Jaime slew the bastard, he came home and they should have been together. Instead Jaime had followed father's whims, whether it was visiting the endless holdfasts of the Westerlands or playing host to whatever High Lord visited Casterly Rock. While these thoughts of Jaime ran through Cersei's head, her twin brother entered the field in his golden armor. The crowd cheered loudly for their future lord. The Westerners only cheered louder for father and Prince Rhaegar while he was still alive. But the cheers soured when they saw his opponent. The massive Sandor Clegane rode in a dark stallion. His dog helm concealed his face, but it was obvious who he was. Only the Mountain, Sandor's older brother, was bigger. "This'll be interesting," muttered Tyrion. "Sir Jaime Lannister will take the field against Sandor Clegane," announced the herald. Jaime rode by the audience, who greeted was with cheers and fawning. He came to a halt in front of the royal podium where Sandor soon joined him, and both of them bowed to the king. He barely acknowledged them, about as interested in the tourney as he was in the feasts. Ned Stark was the complete opposite of Rhaegar Targaryen. Where Rhaegar put on a smile and cheerful face during his public appearances, Eddard Stark didn't hide the fact that he didn't enjoy being out in public like this. Cersei noticed the same disgruntled face he had during the victory feast at Casterly Rock after the war ended. How could a man not enjoy such a position in life? Maybe he hadn't found the proper queen. Cersei had met Queen Catelyn and wasn't impressed. Maybe Tully wasn't the kind of woman to satisfy him. Cersei would have gladly taken up the challenge, but life didn't work that way. Still, if she had been the one seated next to the king, he wouldn't be unhappy. The hound turned and rode off while Jaime gave Cersei and Tyrion a nod before turning his head towards Margaery and gave her one as well. The smile that little slut had on her face made Cersei want to reach out and strangle her. What in seven hells did Jaime do that for? Jaime rode off, not noticing the ire on his sister's face. What was that? Cersei whispered her thoughts out loud. "I'd call it being civil towards his future bride," commented Tyrion. Cersei cursed herself for speaking loud enough for the imp to hear her. Jaime and Sandor took up positions and readied their lances. The two took off towards one another, charging down the line. Jaime managed to score a blow, but Sandor blocked it with his shield and managed to stay on his large horse. The second pass, the hound retaliated by shattering his lance on Jaime's shield. Somehow Cersei's brother managed to hold on but was reeling from the blow, barely able to stay on his mount. A lesser man would have been knocked from his saddle. The third pass, both men struck glancing blows to each other. Fourth pass, and still neither man fell. Jaime was every bit the great knight Cersei knew he was, but the hound was proving to be a challenge. Pass after pass went by and yet both men refused to fall. By now the entire crowd was cheering loudly, both of them receiving a standing ovation. A 10th pass and Jaime landed a decisive blow to the shoulder. Sandor was knocked back, unbalancing himself. He tried to hold on, but his horse wasn't able to maintain its own balance. The large black animal tumbled to the ground. The crowd cheered as Jaime was announced the victor. The hound meanwhile got to his feet, grunting as he chased after his horse, which ran off. Seeing as her twin brother heading back to the tents to rest, Cersei excused herself and followed Jaime. He dismounted and allowed his squire to take his horse back to the stables. Jaime entered a tent to change, giving Cersei the perfect time to speak to him in private. She followed inside as he started to undo his armor. Jaime glanced behind, finally noticing her. "Sister. Come to congratulate me?" he asked. "What did you think you were doing back there?" demanded Cersei. "I believe I was knocking the hound on his ass. I never took you as compassionate for dogs. Especially the ugly ones," quipped Jaime. He never did know when to stop joking. "I mean, what were you doing smiling and waving at that little slut?" snapped Cersei. "Margaery. It was just a smile, sister. I realize the two of us do when we're fucking, but that doesn't mean I'm fucking her," Jaime said. "Again with the stupid jokes. Just a smile. Who told you to do it?" "Father." "Tyrion?" asked Cersei. Jaime frowned at her, then said, "Tyrion suggested I show her a little." "I knew it." Cersei nearly screamed. "That little wretch put you up to this." "He suggested that a little kindness I do here and there will go a long way," sighed Jaime. "And you're more than happy to do whatever he and father tells you to," spat Cersei. "Tyrion is only trying to help and I'll disobey father after you do," Jaime replied sarcastically. Again with his stupid jokes, but it did have merit. As much as Cersei always wanted to get out Tywin Lannister's shadow, it was nearly impossible. Even now Cersei remained subservient to father's every whim. He promised she would be a queen once, but that changed after Aerys's foolish decision to marry Rhaegar to Elia Martell of Dorne. Now Cersei feared the day father would force her into some marriage that wasn't worthy of her. "So that's it then. The same man who defied father to join the Kingsguard has lost his pride along with his balls," mocked Cersei. That touched a nerve in her brother. "I gave up Casterly Rock for you." Jaime snapped. "I gave up everything to be with you." He was referring to when he joined the Kingsguard. While Tywin was still Hand of the King during Aerys's reign, he was trying to arrange a royal match between Rhaegar and Cersei. It seemed so certain that Cersei insisted that Jaime joined the Kingsguard so they could be together. Jaime at first refused, but Cersei changed his mind during the night. In the end, he had the same weakness as every other man. "And now," demanded Cersei, "I'll do it all over again. Throw it all away and go as far as the other side of the Jade Sea just to be with you. Whether we'd live in a palace or a grass hut doesn't matter to me. I'll kill anyone or anything, give up everything again just so you and I can be together. Tell me you'd do the same and I'll take us anywhere you want." "Father and everyone else be damned," Jaime told her. Cersei was tempted to say yes. Just waiting for father to inflict someone who is an heir to some worthless family who owns some worthless castle situated on land no cares about. She was supposed to be a queen, her children were supposed to sit on the Iron Throne and be princes and princesses. Cersei Lannister wasn't meant for anything less. And yet she knew it would never come true after Rhaegar married Elia Martell. So after that, it was just a matter of waiting until father told her his plans. It amazed her he hadn't tried to marry her off already, but unless Tywin could somehow manage to convince Ned Stark to marry Robb to her, his choice wouldn't be worthy of her. But what kind of life could Jaime offer her? If they run, they'll need to run to the other side of the world to escape their father's wrath. Even if they ran tonight with loads of gold in their pockets, they would run out eventually. Jaime could sell his services as a sellsword, but how much gold could he make? Not enough to buy a castle worthy of Cersei. She grew up in Casterly Rock and she wouldn't settle for anything less as grand as her childhood home. It was a pleasant fantasy to think the two of them could run away, but it was just that. A fantasy. And where would we go? Pentos. Karth. Even if we'd find some place father's wrath wouldn't follow us, we'd still need to have a place to live. And I will not wallow in some grass hut like a Dothraki savage. Whatever money we'd be able to smuggle with us, won't be able to buy even a modest palace in the free cities. We deserve better and we'll never get it your way, Cersei stated. Jaime glared at her. "And what would you suggest we do then?" "Just, forgot it," snapped Cersei as she stormed out of the tent. Sometimes she wondered why she even loved him, and yet as Cersei made her way back to the tourney, she couldn't help but feel Jaime's idea might be the only way to escape her fate. She was born to be a queen, not a lady. And if she couldn't be queen, then at least she could be free. underscore 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 underscore. The golden and white armor wasn't comfortable. Garland found that to be appropriate. Duty shouldn't be easy or pleasant. Yet being surrounded by the white knights of the King's Guard gave him a sense of pride and honor he'd never felt before. The only moment comparable was the night before when Randil Tali tapped his Valyrian sword on Garland's shoulders and declared him a knight. The Lord of Hornhill was rarely satisfied by anything Garland did as his squire. He wasn't abusive, but he never gave any praise either. After participating in the rescue of his cousin Horus, Garland could have been knighted by anyone, even the king. But he insisted that Lord Tali knight him. There was no higher praise in his mind than for that man to declare him a knight. And now he was receiving an honor just as great. Garland knelt before King Eddard Stark as the man held his Valyrian sword ice. The king made him swear the sacred vows of the King's Guard. Protect the king and his family with their lives. Obey his commands and maintain his secrets. The same oaths taken by the likes of Ryam Redwine, Criston Cole, Aemon the Dragon Knight, and so many others. Now Garland was going to join their ranks. The king tapped both of his shoulders and ordered him to rise as a knight of the King's Guard. Garland stood up as Barristan Selmy approached him. He unfolded the white cloak that was worn only by King's Guard and clasped the thread on Garland's shoulders. "I, Lord Commander Barristan Selmy, welcome you into our order and our brotherhood," Selmy spoke. The rest of the King's Guard had gathered around him. Balon Swan, Oris Oakurt, Brynden Tully, Mandan Moore, and Garland's own cousin Garth Hightower. Some of them were happy for the latest addition to their ranks, such as Garth, Brynden and Barristan. Others like Balon, Oris, and Mandan didn't seem excited or to care at all. None of that mattered though. He was one of them now. Garland turned to the crowd that had assembled inside the Golden Gallery for the ceremony. Applause erupted inside as everyone cheered the latest member of the King's Guard. In the front row, Garland's family looked on proudly. Mother, Willers, Loras, Margary, all couldn't be happier. Father clapped but seemed slightly disappointed. He was proud, but he had always wanted to make Garland a lord with his own castle. Father felt he had failed in his task, but he'll come around. Randil Tali was seated behind him and gave Garland a respectful nod. Coming from him, that was a high compliment. Garland moved to embrace his family as the ceremony ended. "One of the youngest knights ever accepted into the King's Guard," Mother said proudly as they hugged. It was true, the only person to ever be accepted into the order at a younger age was Jaime Lannister. Coincidentally, he was also attending the ceremony, but the man had a sarcastic smirk on his face as if Garland was on the end of a big joke. "You just wait, brother. I'm going to be a King's Guard just like you," Loras said excitedly. He was just recently accepted by Renly Baratheon as his own squire. Renly was recently knighted, and after a few conversations with father and mother, he agreed to taking Loras under his wing. He was easily persuaded and didn't seem to understand the real reason the Tyrell family wanted Loras so close to him. Renly was close to the king, and hopefully any bond between him and Loras could allow. "Just focus on a knighthood first before donning a white cloak," Garland advised him. "Easy to say from one of the youngest King's Guard in history," remarked Loras. "Doesn't matter what age you join. It's what you accomplish once you get the job," Garland replied. "You look good in gold," Margary commented. "Well, it might look good, but it feels too small," Garland admitted. "Well done, Sir Garland. No one deserves this more than you," Lord Tali said as he approached. That had to be the first time Garland had ever heard a compliment from the man. Tali held out his hand, another first. "Thank you, my lord," Garland replied as he shook Tali's hand. "If only I had more men like you," Tali remarked. Others congratulated him one by one. Grandmother remarked he looked too shiny in that armor, and that if he wanted to avoid marriage, there were easier ways. She insisted Leonette Fossoe was a lovely woman and Garland would have liked her. Willers said he liked the armor. Garland joked that he gets the pretty armor while Willers gets High Garden. Father sadly smiled as he hugged his son. "I wanted to make you a lord. I thought it would make you happy," he said. "I am happy, Father," Garland replied. Others came to offer their congratulations. Lords and knights along with their families. Are you ready for this? Jamie asked him as the two shook hands. Oh yes, nodded Garland. Oh good, chuckled Jamie. Because your first watch starts right about. Sir Garland Barristan called out. The king is leaving and it's your watch. Garland threw a look at Jamie, who shrugged innocently. He was guessing that meant newest Kingsguard is automatically the next one on duty. Probably a rite of passage. He said farewell to his family and immediately joined King Stark at his side. Your Grace, Garland greeted him as he bowed his head. I would return to my chambers to change, then I have a meeting with Lord Tywine, King Eddard informed him as they strolled through the halls of Casterly Rock. Yes, Your Grace, Garland complied. The two arrived at the quest chambers and the king entered alone. Garland stood vigil as the man changed out of his ceremonial armor and left the room dressed in brown and grey garb. Eddard Stark was king of the Seven Kingdoms, but you wouldn't know it from the way he dressed. It was simple clothing any merchant with enough coin could afford. Certainly nothing extravagant like the Lannisters or even the Tyrells wore. Garland escorted the king to the Golden Study, the personal office of the Lords of Casterly Rock. It was here for almost 1,000 years the kings of the Rock decided the fate of their kingdoms and the ones surrounding them. It was no secret that Tywine Lannister and the king had little love or even respect between one another, which meant this had to been about business. Two guards armored in crimson, red and gold bowed their heads as they opened to the study. Lord Tywine Lannister stood up as the king entered along with Garland. Your Grace, he welcomed King Eddard, though his tone was anything but. The guards closed the doors behind them, giving them privacy. Garland didn't need to leave such a meeting. He was sworn to keep the king's secrets even from his own family and Kingsguard. Underscore 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 underscore. Tyrion's curiosity had grown out of proportions standing outside the Golden Study. He heard that the king and his father were having some sort of meeting, but for what? His guess would be for gold. Why else would Eddard Stark deal with a man he loathed? Coin could bring anyone together if the price was right. But from the rumors he heard, the royal treasury was full and whatever debts the crown owed to the Lannisters was paid off long ago. So why ask for more unless the king had something big in mind? Father had wanted to see him afterwards, but right now Tyrion cared more about what was going on inside right now. The day had been full of surprises. A northerner named Ser Jorah Mormont had stunned all of the Seven Kingdoms when he faced off against Jaime Lannister in the finals of the tourney. Tilt after tilt, they battered one another with their lances, but both refused to fall. Then the unthinkable happened. The northerner knocked Jaime off his horse and was declared the winner. When it first happened, the whole crowd was stunned into silence. Tyrion understood how they felt. He knew Jorah was a good, but winning the tournament, not even Tyrion saw that coming. Then a single clap could be heard as King Eddard was the first to applaud the winner. Shortly the rest of the crowd joined him and chanted Ser Jorah as Tyrell announced the formal betrothal between himself and Arianne Martell. A man crippled by Martell was now marrying one. Now the king had requested a private audience with father. Will wonders never cease? There was no shouting or any sound could be heard, which meant the conversation was at least kept quiet. That didn't mean it remained civil though. Tyrion was growing restless, wondering what they were talking about inside. Then the doors opened and Ned Stark walked away, escorted by his latest Kingsguard, Garland Tyrell. Jaime seems to have taken a liking to the boy, no doubt reminded of himself when he was at that age. The king did not seem pleased as he passed by Tyrion. Then Tyrion saw something he never thought possible. Inside the Golden Study, father was seated at his desk with a smile on his face. Tyrion didn't know what was more incredible. The fact that his father was smiling, or that Tywine Lannister had won and not the king after their meeting. Something happened between them and it might be big for father to have such a look on his face. The king was almost seething when he left. Tyrion commented as he stepped inside. Tywine's smile was quickly replaced by a scowl, but Tyrion was used to it. And yet you look as if you were just given the keys to the Red Keep. In a manner of speaking, I did, Tywine stated. Oh? Tyrion asked, too curious for an answer as he walked up to the desk. Father handed him a paper which Tyrion quickly skimmed through it. It was contract, legally binding with both Tywine and Ned Stark's signatures at the bottom along with the stamp of their seals. When Tyrion finished, he was left completely speechless. How the fuck did you manage to do this? The scowl on father's face disappeared, replaced with a subtle smirk. Most people wouldn't see it, but Tyrion had been around Tywine long enough to recognize it. The king recognizes the needs for House Lannister's gold deposits. No matter how well prepared the Seven Kingdoms are for winter, there will always be food shortages. The lords can either pay for more food for their peasants or risk potential riots. Certain families can afford the expense but most cannot, which means they'll need to borrow it, father explained. Tyrion was starting to understand. And there are only two real sources of large loans for Westeros. The Iron Bank and House Lannister, he realized. Ned Stark is looking ahead and wants our interest rates to be kept as a reasonable percentage. Tywine nodded. I can understand that, but I never expected him to concede this, Tyrion said. He's smarter than you realize. The Stark's claim on the Iron Throne is tenures at best. Ned Stark may have secured it for himself by crushing the Greyjoys, but his son and his future heirs are more in doubt. He'll need House Lannister's support to maintain his family's hold. And what better way to do that than through marriage, Tywine pointed out. The Martells are going to be furious to hear Robb and Rhaenys' firstborn son will marry a Lannister, Tyrion stated. Their opinion is irrelevant. The deal was made with Ned Stark and the man has raised his heir to honor his family's debts, Tywine replied. Well, this means you'll finally get what you wanted all along. A king with Lannister blood, commented Tyrion. You were originally hoping to do that by marrying Cersei to Rhaegar until Aerys shot that down. And look how that turned out for him and his son, Tywine said with a cold sense of humor. I guess you get the last laugh after all, Tyrion quipped. I didn't come here to be reminded of the past, Tywine said as he took the contract back. Kevan has resigned his position as Master of Coin. Apparently the wonders continue. Why would he do that? Inquired Tyrion. He is needed here to help supervise the reconstruction of Lannisport and the Lannister fleet. I need someone I can trust and is reliable, answered Tywine. I guess that leaves out Uncle Stafford, Tyrion jested. Tywine's disapproving scowl returned. You will be appointed Master of Coin. Tyrion thought nothing else could surprise him today after finding out what deal father made with the king. He was wrong. What? That position is of great importance not only to the crown but also to this family. The voices of every great house in Westeros are heard at the small council and a Lannister must be among them. Now lose your stupid jokes. You're not being appointed court jester, Tywine said. Why? Father openly hated his youngest son, so why would he give him such an important position? Tywine wasn't stupid. He wouldn't give the job to Tyrion if he didn't think his son wasn't suitable to the task. He wouldn't risk embarrassing himself by sending a fool to serve the king. Then it dawned on Tyrion. He was being sent away. You're sending me away? Why? Demanded Tyrion. I already told you, Tywine answered. No, you explained why you need a Lannister on the small council. You didn't answer why you chose me, Tyrion replied. Jaime is why, Tywine said. Tyrion frowned, confused. He didn't need to ask for an explanation before his father spoke again. He has coming to you more and more over the past few years. I've given him my advice and helped him whenever I can. Is that suddenly a crime? Tyrion snapped. Jaime had been tasked with countless duties by father. No doubt preparing him to one day be Lord of Casterly Rock. Jaime knew how to wield a sword like a knight in a fairy tale, but politics was a battlefield he was ill prepared. So he often sought his younger brother's counsel in matters, and Tyrion did his best. It is when it seems like he is incapable of making his own decisions. His over-reliance on you for any political matter I assign him makes him look weak, Tywine said. Oh, is that the only reason? Tyrion spat. Those are the only reason that matter, Tywine stated. I disagree, father. You've wanted to get rid of me since I was a child, said Tyrion, his anger growing. That has nothing to do with my decision, Tywine said. He wasn't even denying he wanted Tyrion gone. It has everything to do with it. You just wanted to get some use out of me before you discard me. Your own son. Tyrion snapped. Want has nothing to do with it. If I did what I wanted, I would have thrown you into the sea the day you were born. Tywin shot back, losing his own temper. The only reason I let you live is because you're a Lannister. Even if you are the lowest of us, you are still my son, though only because I cannot prove otherwise. Because the great Tywin Lannister giving birth to a dwarf proves he is fallible. How many other dwarfs are born from such great noble families? None. Tyrion insulted him. I can forgive what you are, as wretched as it is. An imp, a whoremonger, a gambler. But I will never forgive you for killing your mother. Tywin snapped. That was the last straw. The thought of leaving Casterly Rock suddenly didn't seem so dreadful. Tyrion turned and stormed out. You leave with the king tomorrow morning. Tywin shouted at his back. The end.